Good evening. I'd like to call the Town Planning Advisory Committee meeting to order this Monday, January 27th, 2025. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We also would like to acknowledge the people of African descent who have been in Nova Scotia for over 400 years. We honor and offer gratitude to those ancestors of Mi'kmaq and African descent who came before us to this land. Firstly, I would like to welcome TJ Jordan, the newest member of our committee. TJ is our community member, replacing Don Taylor. Next, I would ask for us to review the agenda, please. If there are any additions to be made to the agenda, please let me know. And otherwise, if there is a motion to approve the agenda. Sorry. Here we go.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just regarding election of officers, I am no longer the newest member on the committee, thanks to Mr. Jordan. But if my following from home has been correct, that election of officers, I believe, happens yearly, but you haven't been in your chair position for even 1 year yet, have you?
That's that's right. And so I think thank you for bringing that to my attention. We're going to remove that from the agenda for this evening.
That was going to be my recommendation, that we remove that, amend the agenda to remove item 4, election of officers, and we get that onto a regular next January yearly appointments, as it were. That's
right. So yes, I will remain as chair, and Ms. Landa will remain my vice chair. Any other suggested changes to the agenda? Otherwise, if someone would like to make a motion to approve the agenda as revised. So moved. Councillor McGrath and Ms. Delorier. All those in favor of approving the agenda as circulated signify by saying aye. Aye. Any contrary minded? Oh, motion carried. Thank you. So the last meeting was December 16th, 2024, and the minutes have been provided to the committee. If there are any amendments which have not already been communicated, please let us know, and otherwise, if they are acceptable, if someone would like to make a motion to approve them. So moved. Thank you, Councillor Graham. Do I have a seconder? Okay, thank you, Ms. Laurier. All those in favor of approving the minutes as circulated, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any contrary minded? Motion carried. We have on the agenda the housekeeping, municipal planning strategies, land use bylaw amendments, but those were undertaken at the meeting which just immediately preceded this one. Regarding any public consultation going forward on that, how would the public be notified of that? Mr. Fox?
At this point, I would move to a regular council meeting. It would be a public hearing of council and a regular meeting where they would vote on the amendments. There will be a first reading of the amendments at next month's meeting, and at the same time, they would be setting the public hearing date. And we would do advertising on social media and on the town's webpage.
Wonderful, thank you. So we will now move to our applications. The first.
I need a motion from the committee to recommend approval
of the amendments. Director of Planning, Mr. Fox, would like the committee to put forward a motion, please, to accept the amendments as circulated to the committee earlier this evening. Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Ms. Langell, thank you. All those in favor of approving the staff report provided by Director of Planning and Development Services, Jason Fox, dated January 23rd, 2025, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Please signify by saying nay. Motion carried. Thank you. Okay, now we can move on to our regularly scheduled applications. So the first is step 3 of our standard format. This is under Planner Connolly's, no, sorry, it is not. It is. It's you, sorry. It's Mr. Fox's staff report. So this is 4648 Ford Street and 2238 Rexdale Drive, a development application by Wallace Retirement Living. Go ahead, Mr. Fox.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as mentioned, this is a development agreement application for 2238 Rexdale and 4648 Ford Street. An application by Wallace Retirement Living. The application was originally made back in June 13th, 2024. It's for a multi-unit residential development consisting of 4 buildings on land south of Marshland Drive at 4648 Ford Street and 2238 Rexdale Drive. Proposal includes 2 6-story 50 to 55 unit buildings and 2 4-story 35 to 40 unit buildings. The total number of proposed dwelling units is expected to be between 170 and 190 units. This application is currently at step 3 of the town's 5-step development agreement application process. At this meeting, at this time, we'd be looking for a recommendation from the committee, following any feedback from the committee members, from any questions you may have of the developer, and also if there's any input from the public as well. It may all be entertained at this time before the committee makes its recommendation to council. So prior to this, it was originally back before the Planning Advisory Committee in August 26th, 2024. And at that meeting, there was a couple of additional pieces of information that were requested from the applicant. That was information around the conceptual design drawings and also landscaping plans and stormwater management flood mitigation plans. Those, I think, have been subsequently provided. Following step 1, the application was posted on the town's website and there was public signage, notice signage put on the properties. Step 2, just prior to step 2, the applicant did provide more detailed site plans, detailed renderings, some general landscaping details along with a site grading and drainage plan, preliminary, together with a letter from a professional engineer stating that the proposal will be designed to meet all town flood mitigation and stormwater management requirements. So that did happen following step 1, just prior to step 2. We also did, prior to step 2, a public mail-out and online survey. And at the step 2 meeting, PAC members, Planning Advisory Committee members expressed concern about building height and flooding drainage of floodwaters, stormwater management. There was also discussion about access during flooding, and then there was a discussion about bicycle parking. That all happened at the step 2 meeting. So now we're at step 3, but just prior to today's meeting, there was no additional information received from the applicant in response to the issues raised at the last meeting. Although, as I mentioned, we did receive the letter from the professional engineer indicating that the plan is to conform with all of the town's requirements for floodproofing, flood mitigation, stormwater management, and drainage. And just to familiarize everybody with the lands that we're speaking of, or we're under the subject lands. So the lands are south of Marshland Drive, have access off of the end of Ford Street and also off of Rexdale. There I mentioned earlier at 4648 Ford Street and also 2238 Rexdale Drive. The property identification numbers are also provided there on the screen. So the lands are outlined in blue here. You can see Marshland Drive running across the top of the screen. Ford Street is located here on the right-hand side, and just off to the bottom is the end of, at the bottom of the screen and center is the end of Rexdale. So these are the 2 parcels being discussed here. Just a photo of the subject lands from the end of Rexdale. You can see Omkana's buildings over here on the right-hand side. And this is the land in the background here, one of the parcels. The subject lands are in this is an excerpt from the town's future policy or future policy area map, showing that the lands are within the urban growth feature designation or policy area designation. And also you can see an excerpt from the town's zoning map showing the property is zoned urban growth and environmental reserve. So the urban growth is the purple, the blue is the environmental reserve around a water course. but you'll also see that there is a hatching over the property, which indicates that the property is entirely within the 1 in 20 flood overlay. So that's the light blue hatching. In terms of the development proposal, this is a site plan of the proposed development. As I mentioned, it consists of the 4 buildings. 2 of these would be 6-story buildings. This building here would be the 6-story. Another building over here is 6-story, and then there's 2 4-story buildings as well. There is no vehicle access proposed from Marshland Drive. So Marshland Drive runs across the top of the screen here. All vehicle access would either be from Ford Street or from Rexdale, and there's no internal circulation between the 2 properties. And this is just a rendering, some conceptual renderings that were submitted by the developer. The buildings are situated in 2 groups, with 2 of the buildings. These are buildings A and B, which would be closest to Park Street, and 2 of the buildings, C and D, which would be closer to Rexdale Drive. The applicant has positioned the 2 6-story buildings, buildings A and C, to the north of the site, away from existing residential development on Ford, although it is closer to Cross Street. And the other building is over closer to Rexdale Drive, but again pushed further to the north, closer to Marshland. This is, as I noted, and was noted at the last meeting, a highly idealized landscaping rendering showing some mature trees around the subject property. But the landscaping details will be subject to review by the town's urban forestry technician, and any draft development agreement would encourage that a landscaping plan and tree planting and retention plan be developed in consultation with the urban forestry technician. It's another rendering showing buildings C and D. So these are the ones closer to Rexdale. The development includes a mixture of surface parking and a grade level interior parking. So there's no below grade parking, but the first floor of the buildings, I think it's A and B, would be occupied by be structured parking, and then the rest of the site would be not the rest of the site, but the rest of the parking would be situated at grade surrounding the developments. So there's surface parking for 100 vehicles for buildings A and B, plus an additional 24 spaces on the ground floor of each building, which works out to be a ratio of around 1.56 to 1.74 spaces per unit. Buildings C and D have surface parking for 122 vehicles, which works out to a ratio of around 1.28 to 1.44 spaces per unit. This development will have a total of 270 spaces with a parking ratio of between 1.42 and 1.56 spaces per unit. So this is a conceptual rendering a little bit closer of one of the proposed buildings. This is building C off Rexdale, and this is just a view of building C and D. So building C in the background, which is the 6-story building, and then you can see the 4-story building in the front. This would be looking northeast towards Marshland Drive. This is a rendering of building A looking south from Marshland. And then just some detailed site plans. So the proposal does include preliminary site grading and drainage plans prepared by a licensed professional engineer. Engineer has confirmed that the site will be designed to conform to the town's floodproofing, flood mitigation, stormwater management requirements. The development agreement will require that these plans be prepared by a professional engineer and approved by the town engineer's office before the town that's the recommendation anyway, that this be a condition of any approval, that those have to be signed off on and approved by the town engineer's office before the town enters into any agreement. So in terms of policy analysis and review, this is the enabling policy that allows council to consider this application. So it's policy UG 35. It just says it shall be a policy council to consider any multi-unit development with more than 18 units by development agreement. And then it talks about the criteria that are set out in chapter 14 of the municipal planning strategy, which is implementation. And that's what it forms the basis of the review that was conducted by staff, that implementation section. So just to continue with the analysis. So planning staff have reviewed the proposal based on the applicable policies found in the town's planning documents. Potential issues with policy compliance will be discussed on the following slides. These include the need for additional information, including a stormwater management, drainage, flood risk mitigation plan, servicing plans, and a traffic impact study. There's potential concerns about building height, and then also about the proposed mixture of dwelling types and the mixture of uses, or in this case, the lack of a mixture of uses. So staff have reviewed the proposal based on the policies found in the town's planning documents. And again, the issues of compliance discussed in the following slides, these will include the need for servicing plans, the traffic impact study, need for stormwater management. Actually, this is a bit of a repeat of the last slide, apologies. And then concerns about building height, and then the proposed mixture of dwelling types and mixture of uses. So the first item there was the servicing and infrastructure issues. So the applicant's submission does not include detailed servicing plans or details regarding required upgrades to municipal infrastructure. Town Engineer's Office has requested that the applicant submit servicing plans for approval. These plans must include provision also for new fire hydrants on the property to address concerns raised by the town's fire inspector and building officials. Staff are recommending that these plans be submitted for approval prior to the town entering into a development agreement. Also, Ford Street between Cross Street and the applicant's property line is not currently built to municipal standard and will need to be upgraded with paving, curb, gutter, and sidewalk in order to provide vehicle access to the site. Traffic impact. The proposed development will be accessed entirely via 2 local streets, Ford and Rexdale. The Traffic Authority has requested that a traffic impact study be undertaken and submitted by the applicant to demonstrate that the street network can handle any anticipated increase in traffic. And it is recommended that this plan be submitted for approval prior to the town entering into an agreement. So again, all these conditions are in place. That the way it's being proposed is that these be a requirement of any approval. So if the committee decides to go ahead with an approval, and if council decides to proceed with an approval, that no agreement be entered into until such time as these plans are submitted and approved by the town engineer's office. Stormwater management, flood mitigation. The town's current floodplain regulations do permit limited development within the floodplain, and any structures are required to be flood-proofed. In the entire subject property, as I mentioned, is in the 1 in 20 flood risk area. Preliminary site grading, drainage, and flood-proofing plans have been submitted by the applicant along with a memo from their engineer indicating that they intend to the proposed development will conform to the town's floodproofing and stormwater drainage requirements. This will include balance cut and fill approach, as well as restriction on the placement of off-site fill below the 1 in 20 flood elevation. And staff are recommending that the town, again, not enter into a development agreement to permit the proposed development until the applicant has submitted plans prepared by a professional engineer, and that these would be approved by the town engineer's office prior to entering into any agreement. Also, it says here that these plans must demonstrate how the development will be flood-proofed in accordance with the town's requirements, and confirming that this development will not contribute to upstream or downstream flooding or result in a change in flood flow patterns. So building height was another potential concern identified by staff as part of the review based on the town's planning policies. So the proposed 6- and 4-story buildings are situated in a residential area of town where existing development is typically 1 to 3 stories in height. Building A exceeds the applicable height requirements of the UG zone or the urban growth zone and may have a negative impact on the neighboring properties within the general residential policy area. The UG zone does specify that the maximum permitted height of a building has to be 0.75 times the distance the proposed structure is from a general residential zone, and Building A is situated approximately 21.5 meters from the nearest GR zone property on 64 Ford Street. So Building A is approximately, and these are all based on rough plans, so we haven't received detailed elevation drawings, so these are all estimates by staff, but it looks like it's about approximately 19.5 meters tall, which is about 3.38 meters over what would be the height limit prescribed by the urban growth zone. The proposal also aligns with many of the town's planning policies, including increased residential densities around the downtown, that should say, new dwelling units on existing infrastructure. So we're looking at, again, we have a site here that is serviceable. It's got services around it. There wouldn't be big extensions of municipal infrastructure required, so they're able to accommodate existing residential or accommodate new residential density on existing infrastructure. For the most part, small extension to Ford Street would be required. Also, there's a policies dealing with walkable neighborhoods, and this would address that to some extent, where it would provide a new housing within a relatively short walking distance to many services and amenities. And so review by other departments. So on the 14th of January, we did send it out to a bunch of other agencies, including the town's urban forestry coordinator, the school board, or the regional center for education, the fire inspector, the building inspector, the town engineer's office, the traffic authority, the director of parks, recreation, and culture, and police chief, and they were all forwarded details of the proposal, invited to provide any comments or concerns. Feedback received has highlighted the need for a detailed servicing plan. So how the site will be serviced with municipal water and sewer. Details on floodwater drainage, traffic impact study, and plans for fire department access, as well as private on-street hydrants, on-site hydrants, pardon me. No other significant concerns were identified, and at the time this report was prepared, we were still waiting for comments back from the urban forestry coordinator. This is the results of the survey that was conducted, so there were no responses to our online survey. We did post signs on the property on December 23rd, 2024, or the applicant did, I should say. Information was posted on the town's website in a current development application starting on August 23rd, 2024, and we regularly updated the information throughout the process. We did a mail out to 75 property owners located within 150 meters of the subject properties on the 13th of January, and as I mentioned, there were no responses to the survey as of the 21st. So next steps, we are at, again, we're at step 3. The next step in the process is to move on to step 4, which would be the public hearing and decision by council. This is where you have a finalized concept presented to council with recommendation from PAC and from staff, and there would be a council decision and vote at that time. And at that time, staff would also prepare and submit a final staff report and recommendation. And at today's PAC meeting, so at step 3 again, PAC members are expected to make their recommendation to council. The recommendation may include conditions or be subject to the submission of additional information. Council also has the option to defer decision at this time based on or pending the receipt of some more detailed information around any of the items outlined in staff's presentation today. So at the end, based on a review of everything, all the policies in their entirety, looking at the site, the staff recommend approval with conditions. Staff recommend that council approve the application by Wallace Retirement Living to develop 4 multi-unit residential buildings containing the 170 to 190 dwelling units at 4648 Ford Street and 2238 Rexdale Drive, subject to the submission and approval of a servicing plan, stormwater management, flood mitigation plan, and traffic impact study. Respectfully submitted, and that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. Councillor Graham.
I have a couple of questions here. One is for Mr. Fox. The extension of Ford Street, I'm just wondering who bears the cost of that? Is that the developer or the town who would?
That's actually can be negotiated. It used to be that we weren't allowed to require off-site improvements as part of a development agreement, but that was changed with amendments to the Municipal Government Act. So we now can, as a condition of approval, require that the developer foot the cost of any infrastructure improvements off-site. So the extension of the street could be a cost borne by the applicant.
Does that need to be,
One of our conditions.
pardon?
One of our conditions.
Yeah, I wonder, what would be the process to make that a condition?
You can certainly make it clear as part of the recommendation. It would have been included in the draft agreement anyway. That would have been something I would have included in there, that we wouldn't bear that cost, but it certainly helps clarify things in our position if it is if part of the recommendation.
Is a motion required to do that with this committee?
I think you can just add it to the motion at the end.
At the end?
Yeah.
Okay. I would like to do that, so when the appropriate time. My next 2 questions are for our developer. If you...
Mr. Chisholm, if you could come to the microphone, that would be great.
It seems at this time there are quite a few question marks, and they seem to be very costly question marks, but that's neither here nor there. It's between you and our engineer, so I wish you all the best of luck with that. And it's certainly, I do not want to impede the progress of this application because of the need for housing and the location and all of that, but it does seem a bit overwhelming to me. However, that being said, 2 questions. The first is, I didn't see it here and I may have missed it. Do you have an idea of the makeup of the units that you are looking at? 1, 2, 3 bedroom units?
It will be a mixture. I don't have the exact, because we don't know at this point exactly, we haven't got the approvals yet to go into more details, but it will normally be a mixture of 1 and 2 and some 3, but for the most part, 2 and 2 seems to be the optimum level, so we'll probably get the maximum number of 2s and then some 1s and 1 or 2 3s.
Yeah, I understand the whole cost benefit and the twos and the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it certainly is not dependent on approval of your application, but I would strongly encourage threes. I hear there are a lot of families who are in need and wanting to move to our community, but unable to find suitable housing for families. So again, it's not a condition of approval, but strongly would like to encourage some threes.
Noted.
The last, again, it is not dependent, an approval is not dependent on this. However, I'd like to bring to your attention a new committee that has been formed. It's to speak directly to the preservation or the enhancement. The details are yet to be finalized with our West Prince area, one of our, if not the last, historic Black community in Truro. But Ford Street also used to be a predominantly Black community, and you have two significant developments there. And the amenity space has not been defined yet. I would encourage you to think of our Black community when you're thinking about the amenity space, and I'm sure that that newly formed committee would welcome conversation with you as it pertains to this development and maybe specifically to the amenity space,
Okay.
which is yet to be defined.
Yep.
And again, not a condition of the approval, but again, I'd like to strongly encourage your participation with that committee.
Okay. I know that was an issue that was touched on previously, I think at an earlier meeting, the historic nature.
Mr. Chisholm, sorry to interrupt. Do you just mind speaking into the microphone so that our viewing audience can pick up your voice?
Okay. That was an issue that was touched on earlier, and I'm certainly aware of the historic nature of that community. I know I've got a friend here, Mr. Tynes, who I've certainly consulted and spoke to about the issue. I know he's born, I think, in the neighborhood there and continues to live there. So we've taken some steps already in order to sort of try to discern if this is something that's going to be acceptable to the character of the neighborhood. And so we will continue to work on that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. Councillor McGrath. Have we got too many microphones on?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chisholm. Some questions, much like Councillor Graham, concerned a little bit about a lot of the unknowns that we have at this stage. This will pass, as Mr. Fox mentioned. The next step will be before council. That's step 4 out of 5. But there's still a lot of unknowns. We don't know what the unit number, what the unit count is going to be. We don't know what the parking ratio necessarily is going to be. No amenity space. It says here, detailed floor plans and unit details not available at this time that the report was written. When do you expect to have those details, sir?
That would, as you know, this process is a work in progress. There's not much point in going out and incurring detailed plans if I come to the committee and then we discover that they have to be, floors have to be taken off or that things have to be adjusted. So we're intending to provide all of the information that's requested. But at this point, it's sort of one step at a time in order to get to where we have to go in order to be able to provide when those details are requested and needed in order to get to the next approval, we'll have them there for you. So we'll incur those expenses as we proceed along. So that was our intention as we proceeded with the project. Okay,
because you mentioned earlier you have not yet reached a point where you have that approval. Where is that point? Is that after it passes PAC into council, like between these next two meetings?
Yes, that's right. Absolutely.
Okay. Because I know people are going to want to know the surface parking versus underground parking. I assume that the surface parking is mostly related to cost. Are you in a position to provide ballpark figures on the cost of the surface parking versus the underground parking?
I don't think it's as much the cost issue as the fact that we're on a floodplain and we've got to build the buildings above the flood zone. So there's going to be first floor parking underneath the building, which is pretty much at level. It's not underground parking like you'd anticipate in the city where you drive down and there's 2 or 3 tiers underneath the buildings. It's not gonna be like that at all. So the costs, will be higher, of course, because you're built under concrete and the floors and everything have to be built up with concrete pillars. So it would be, there's considerable more, expense, but we're also limited to the number of underground or parking spaces that are within the building because of the footprint of the building itself. So that's pretty much the limitation, not so much the cost.
More around floodplain.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and then on that, we mentioned that it's only 600 meters walk from grocery. And I assume that's actual walking, not direct line from center of property to center of property or whatever. Somebody's actually kind of mapped out like, oh, we can walk that distance. Yeah, perfect. And then only 1,200 meters from the mall. Wonderful. I guess my biggest thing is just looking for those additional details, having Parks and Rec have an ability to weigh in on the amenity space and whether or not they are satisfied that all conditions are being met. And yeah, echoing Councillor Graham's comments as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McGrath. Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, good evening, Mr. Chisholm. I just don't think it's ready for council yet. It's already been expressed. I think there's a lot of questions here. And my biggest questions aren't around parking, et cetera, though I have some around parking. You know, how can you determine parking when you don't have all the units? But generally, you know, you have sufficient parking. My biggest concern is the flood risk, you know, building on the floodplain, and what that means, you know. We've done some building on the floodplain, but this seems to be a step further than we've taken ever before. And I'm concerned about that, and so I just have some questions around that. So I'll start with Mr. McKinnon. Mr. McKinnon, the CBLC study that we've referenced here, and then we talk about cut and fill. Is that cut and fill, and sorry that I didn't read through that in preparation for the meeting, but is cut and fill, does that come from the CBL study, or is that a different, is that a looking at the CBL study and then deciding to move, to make the flood-proof things, we should do a cut and fill? Can you just fill me in on the background of that? Do you understand the question?
Not
Did I make
really.
it-
The cut and fill goes back before the CBCL study. The CBCL study just got into more detail on what the flood-prone areas are and what kind of measures the town and the county and Millbrook can do to help mitigate flooding in the future. But cut and fill has always been part of the process.
Okay. It's just that I would like to see, and I mentioned this last time, I'd like to see council sort of given the new council here. I know this study was done in 2016 or 2015, 2016. You reported in 2017, I believe, to council back then. But this council hasn't had a briefing on that. And I think it's really needed myself. I would like to hear from you on you know, flood proofing and what this study had to say. Because this is an important question. You know, we want to develop Truro. Truro has to build. We don't have many places to build. One of the things, if we want to grow the community, we have to look at building on the floodplain, but we want to be wise about it. And so before I feel comfortable making that decision, I feel as though I need more information. And I know this is coming before council. And Mr. Fox, I'm a little frustrated that, you know, should it leave this committee and yet? Should this committee be the ones that understand that, or is this for council to understand? Do you understand what I'm asking? I'm asking, is it ready to leave committee and for approval to go to council to consider, or is there more detail that this committee should look at in order to make a responsible decision regarding its approval to go to council?
So the way I approach this, because you would notice that there was a number of concerns I had with the proposal as outlined in my report. How I typically approach these would be the development agreements would be drafted in such a way that the development would have to meet all the normal land use bylaw requirements unless specifically addressed and stated otherwise. So the only really outstanding issue here that hasn't been met by the development that's currently before us, barring details I don't have, things like unit sizes and all that, would be the height issue. That's the one that I had that didn't meet the current bylaw requirements.
Right.
So that's why it was identified. So everything else would have to meet all the standard bylaw requirements, including our flood proofing, including stormwater management. So those are in place whether there's a development agreement here or not. So at the end of the day, my recommendation here is based solely on, I'm asking, I guess, for the committee to look at the height being allowed to be somewhat a little bit higher than it should be.
Right.
But other than that, it has to meet everything.
Right.
And that unit range at the end of the day really doesn't, it's within that margin of error that the unit range produces isn't, in my mind, significant enough to warrant refusal.
Yeah, in regards to the height, I do believe what your report said. I think it's a reasonable suggestion that we don't worry about the height because of the development agreement that's presently at the end of Ford Street. And so there's not really a single-family residential building that's going to continue at that site. So I understand that, and to me, that's a sidebar. Yeah, okay, that's fine. I understand that. And, but I still like, I think council needs to have a greater understanding of what they're approving because of the risk here. I think there's a risk here.
Right. And it is fully within this committee's right also to say, I'm not prepared to make a recommendation. I need more information. So you can make that decision as a committee and say, I need to see a stormwater management plan before I'm prepared to make a decision. Right. But as Mr. Chisholm pointed out, that is asking a lot from the developer to expend money at this point preparing engineering drawings at a stage when he's not sure if he has any kind of approval. Right. So there's a balance to be struck there, and that's sort of on this committee to make that decision.
Right. Right. And Mr. McKinnon, you believe that there's sufficient room there to remove, let's say, if this property is 9 meters above sea level, let's say, and we can go down to 8.3 meters or something. So let's say a half a meter. Is there enough room there to remove like a half a meter of fill to build up the site?
I don't believe anything. Their engineer had some tough work to do, given the site, but it's probably manageable. And I think the biggest issue, not so much the cut and fill, but it's going to be maintaining a flow of flood water away from the neighborhoods after a flood. Right. But that issue, there was an engineer overcame that issue with the development of the new Labor's House on Queen Street. There were concerns in that neighborhood that once that building was built on the spare lot at the time, that the flood waters from the houses on High Street wouldn't be able to get away. They overcame that with calculating the volume of water that used to sheet across that empty lot and making sure that there was a floodway around both sides of that house when it was built. And they managed to accomplish it. So his engineers got some tough work ahead, but they can probably figure out a way to do it. Right. Whether it's fair to make them do it ahead of time or not, I don't know.
And I said last time, I'm not an engineer, and I have faith in you, Mr. McKinnon, that if you say it's a go, it's a go. But I think you can probably appreciate, my concern, because of the fact that this doesn't affect this property. This affects a lot of properties that are presently residential properties on the 1 in 20. The more we build down there, the more risk perhaps there is. And I don't even know if that's true, but it seems to me that that's true. Moving on to this environmental zone and Marshland Drive. Is that a waterway that goes through Marshland Drive, or is Marshland Drive like a dike, preventing water from going through? Do you follow what if you look at the development proposal, there's a environmental zone there, and it seems to run up to Marshland Drive. Yep. Is there a culvert underneath the?
There is. There's 2 or 3 culverts under Marshland Drive, and there's a highway ditch on either side, and the ditches carry the storm waters from all of those neighborhoods across Marshland Drive and towards the dike system. Okay. But yes, our concern as staff is also whether this can work or not for all of the neighborhood and area, and we're not going to approve it until we see the actual plans and the actual numbers. I can't say right now without seeing the plans.
Okay, understood. Okay, just a other couple more things, Mr. McKinnon, and that has to do with Rexdale Drive. There's no storm water, there's no storm drains, there's no sidewalk, there's no curb on Rexdale. Is that the same as Ford? There'll be a requirement there because there's going to be a lot of units there. People are going to be walking out. There's no sidewalk there. You know, I like to see a sidewalk on one side of Rexdale Drive and also perhaps some stormwater management on Rexdale Drive to relieve some of the water that would leave that site and go to the lower area.
I don't know, that can be, as far as the sidewalks go and what's needed, that can be left for the traffic engineer and the traffic impact study.
Okay.
Whether stormwater management there needed or not, that there's, you know, right now there's a ditch that takes the water away from that area. Right now it's a very short street and it's never been developed to a full urban cross-section with curb and gutters, but, you know, that might be something that the town needs to consider in the future.
Okay. My last thing is for you, as a developer, Mr. Chisholm, I'd like to see some landscaping on the site, you know, some trees if possible. So it's a low site, you know, it's not ideal for tree growth, but there's probably some trees that could withstand that kind of wet soil conditions. And it would certainly help with perhaps with flooding, et cetera, right? And soil stabilization, so, yeah.
The company I owned before owned the apartment buildings on the corner of Park Street and Marsh, and there are willow trees that'll grow very well there. So there are trees that will grow, and they grow well in that sort of marshy, you know, sort of poorly drained soil sometimes, and sometimes flooding. And they seem to thrive in
Yeah, I think there's some down there now, actually, of fair
Yeah,
size
there are
already,
some
yeah,
nice ones there.
yeah. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Councillor Graham.
A quick question, and I think you may have just answered it, but just to ask again, do you have experience building in these conditions?
No, I'm a lawyer by trade, and
I didn't mean you, sorry, you and your team of, do you have experience building in these
Yeah,
types of conditions?
The people that we hire certainly do, like Design Point Engineering. This is the engineering group that I've been working with, and that's what they do. That's their stock and trade, is developing in every type of condition. So they've got the engineers that work with the stormwater management. They've got, you know, they know what they're doing, and I believe that Mr. Fox has worked with them in the past, and so they're accomplished, and I've got faith in them at this point.
Are there other developments in town that you could reference that firm has worked on successfully?
I can't rate off, but I know we've worked with them several times. Andrew might be a better person to ask, but I can't think of a specific one, but I certainly know the name and certainly am familiar with their work. But, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Couple of more just questions, and I guess this would probably be for our traffic authority over there. Right now, there is no access from this site to Marshland Drive. Marshland Drive is, I understand, controlled access. Is that something that we expect to remain in place for the foreseeable future, that will always be controlled access, or will at some point in the future, do you anticipate that Marshland Drive might be accessible from maybe not even this development, but this area in general?
Yeah, when Marshland Drive was built, it was built as controlled access. The only access that was permitted at the time was the old E.B. Hill property because they had large trucks and cranes, and we preferred their access on Marshland Drive rather than the residential and the Roby Street. It was a good chance to get them off of the residential part of Roby Street. I don't foresee that we're going to start permitting driveways at this point, and it, you know, forever is an awful long time, and unfortunately, we allowed some driveways on controlled access road that we used to have on McClure's Mills Road, and we ended up with Tim Horton's driveway and Lawton's driveway and a lot of car accidents. So, you know, I don't think we should open up the door for what's an existing controlled access road. No.
Okay, so my concern now, possibly with 270 parking spaces at this development exiting both Rexdale and Ford, do we start to face issues if there were, God forbid, a major fire, either a forest fire or some flooding or something? If we had to evacuate people out of there, do we have sufficient infrastructure space to evacuate all those people out of these two roads that we have access?
Well, that can be part of the traffic impact study, but as the current layout, it's showing two driveways, one off either end of the development. I'm not sure if it's connected through in the site plan, or if maybe it's going to be recommended to be connected through for interior circulation on the site plan. But that can all come out in the traffic impact study. If you recall, some of the floods previously, there were people rescued from the apartments with the driveway in off of Park Street, and that was managed okay.
Okay, yeah, there is no current connection there, and I'm assuming, Mr. Fox, because of the environmental reserve and that waterway, that there would be no vehicle access connecting the two? That would not be allowed?
That would have to be something considered as part of the agreement. I'm not even sure then if it would be permissible. I'd have to look into that more. I hadn't anticipated the question, and nor there being a connection between the two different sides of the property, so I don't have an answer for that right now.
Okay, we can follow up on that another time, but I just assume that because of the environmental reserve, that there would be no connection. Possibly there could be a pedestrian bridge that connects the two, possibly that would be useful for whatever amenity space is to be planned, which we don't know about yet, but I guess maybe exiting onto Ford as well, you've got Cross Street there, so Mr. Fox, a question for you regarding Rexdale. What is the classification of that street right now? It's not an arterial for sure. Would that be a local street, and would you see a need to reclassify based on the number of people who will be living at these units and the potential traffic increase?
That's probably a better question for your traffic authority, so it might be Mr. McKinnon can respond to that.
To the traffic authority then.
Sorry, so what was the question?
What is the current classification for Rexdale Drive, and do we see a need to potentially reclassify it based on the potential traffic increase by the number of people living at these two units?
That could be a question for the traffic impact study, but right now it's a local residential street.
Local resident.
And whether the number of apartments and the amount of traffic it's going to generate needs that increase or not, I'm not sure.
Well, and this came up from Deputy Mayor Thomas, as so often I appreciate his insights. He always gives me something new to think about and something new to ask, and pointing out that there are no sidewalks on Rexdale, and yet we talked earlier about the 600 meters away from the grocery store, the 1,200 meter walk to the mall. Are people going to do that walking if they don't have a safe sidewalk to use?
It could be low enough pedestrian and traffic volumes that they don't need a sidewalk as well.
I think something to consider for sure.
Yep, something for the traffic impact study to look at.
Okay, and my final question, and this, I'm not sure who is best to answer this, but just talking about the floodplains, and again, Deputy Mayor brought up about the potential for Marshland acting as a dike. And I assume this comes from the stormwater management plan, but my concern, I guess, is that when you've got this plain, if you think about it like a bathtub, and you're bringing these buildings up above the level of the water, you're also sort of bringing a large body into that area, which has the potential to also push the waters up higher around it. Is that something that the stormwater management plan is going to take into effect, that we can be concerned that me dropping into the bathtub doesn't spill the water over?
I guess that's for me, is it?
That's for anybody who feels they are qualified to answer the question.
Well, you might want to read the CBCL flood study, because it goes into that in great detail, and given the vast size of the floodplain over the length of the Salmon River, they determined that development has very minimal impact on the floodwaters, and it's all boils down to good stormwater management.
I guess my concern would be that, perhaps dropping a building in doesn't have a big effect over that large area, but, we drop in 4 buildings here, 4 buildings there, 5 buildings over there. Do we start to have a bigger impact? Do we start to have some concerns?
I know one of the conditions is that it's a cut and fill, so that we don't bring in any new fill, that we remove fill from part of the area in order to build up another part, in order to have it there, so that there's no, in the overall picture, there's no change in the amount of water that would be collected in that parcel of land. So that's my understanding of how the cut and fill works.
Yeah, so it would be no more leaving the property than after the development than before, but hopefully improved as well. I believe that's the wording, Mr. McKinnon. That and you might need a microphone activated, but that we would have that no more and preferably less water is leaving the site after the development than prior to.
So essentially, no more people jumping in the tub than are getting out.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, thank you. My question has to do with the parking here. Just for clarity, it says building A and B have surface parking for 100 vehicles plus an additional 24 spaces on ground floor of each building, A and B, I take it. Building C and D has surface parking. So from that, I gather that C and D are not going to have ground floor parking, but I can't imagine that's not, is that just the way I'm reading it, or is that?
No, I believe that's the way it's currently proposed, unless
Okay.
I've read the plans incorrectly.
Yeah, no, that's the way it's proposed right now, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Just because those, the C and D that those properties are a little bit lower than the A and B from what I could see from some topography. And so I would think that that'd be more of a risk. And I know you're bringing it up to 3.5 inches above the 1/100 floodplain, but I would still, that brings an added safety. Do you follow what I'm saying? An added safety to the residents in that the first floor is actually a parkade and residents don't start to the second floor. I like that idea from the perspective that it brings safety to those residents to their apartments. So that's what I'd like to see. I think that's something that would give added safety.
Thank you. Duly noted.
Councillor Graham?
One last thing. If you are successful in this committee recommending that it goes to a hearing, that would be next month. But do you think that a month is enough time for you to provide maybe a little bit more detail? Would you have confidence then to start your plans? So that once it comes before council, maybe council would have a little bit more to go on.
I'd have to be able to check with the engineering team, like Design Point and Zap Engineering. There's two groups that I work with, and they've got people working there on numerous projects. So I can't really speak to what their schedule is going to be like and whether I could get that accomplished within a month, but we'd certainly do our very best to try to get as much information as we could. And if we couldn't proceed immediately within a month, then it would have to be a little longer, but we'd do our best.
So I wonder, Councillor Thomas, in consideration of your comments about it not being ready to leave council or this committee at this time, and I don't know if our process allows it or if even our developer would be agreeable, but I wonder if pushing it out 2 months before it went to public hearing would satisfy everybody in this at this time. Would anyone?
Just to clarify, Councillor Graham, are you indicating that it would leave this committee this evening and the next step, meaning step 4, public hearing and decision by town council, would have a longer period of time, either because Mr. Chisholm didn't feel he was ready, or
Or,
We
well, to
we
give-
mandated that, the committee?
I'm wondering, I'm just putting that out there as a question, if it might satisfy Councillor Thomas's concerns and give our developer the opportunity to work with his engineering firms to maybe get something a little more concrete before it goes to council,
So-
or goes to a hearing.
So it's really up to, this committee just makes a recommendation to proceed to, for council to proceed to set a public hearing date. But that doesn't mean necessarily that the developer can't reach out and say, I need to postpone for a month or 2 months in order to gather the required information because I'm not comfortable proceeding at this time. So the developer could request that extension if required. So it doesn't sound like he knows if he can have the information he needs to feel comfortable to proceed or not at this time, but he might have he has the option to request additional time if need be. So I don't think it's necessary for this committee to put that kind of timeline on anything.
So I guess it's up to council to set the hearing date, right?
Correct.
So council could achieve maybe what you're suggesting. Okay? And does that sound good to you, that it may be pushed out a month?
Certainly fine, yeah.
Just for clarity, though, what you're referencing, Councillor Graham, with respect to Councillor Thomas's comments, is it the parking or?
Not necessarily the parking. It was one part of the concerns expressed by Councillor Thomas, but there were concerns, I believe, from myself and Councillor McGrath surrounding what seems to be an overwhelming challenge and expense to getting appropriate stormwater management plans in place, and maybe needing at least a start on that so that council, when it comes to hearing, has maybe a little bit more confidence in the ability of the engineers to provide that security, and our engineer too, to have had a good look or an initial look. But I guess that will come to I'm hopeful that this committee will refer it to council and we'll go from there.
Yeah, and what I understand from what Mr. Fox has indicated is that those matters, to do with unit layout and stormwater management and flood mitigation, regardless of if Mr. Chisholm was before this committee or not, those would all be managed by staff, basically without our involvement. So we, I think, need to decide whether the height of Building A is an issue that we want addressed, the parking, meaning no parking on the main floor, and that being residential of Building A is an issue that we want to address. So maybe if we can just sort of see if those are issues that we are comfortable with at this meeting, or whether we wish to have more time for those to be fleshed out further by Mr. Chisholm. I think that might be helpful. If anyone has anything to add on those points.
I guess in addition to those two was our discussion about the extension of Ford Street, that we may include that in our motion to.
Yes, the cost, and I mean, maybe we could put that to you right now, Mr. Chisholm, as Councillor Graham has suggested that in our recommendation, if it is made, that we put some or all of the cost for the improvement of the infrastructure on Ford Street on the development. Is that something you're willing to consider?
Certainly consider, but I think it's a subject for negotiation as well. I heard Cross Street, Ford Street, Rexdale Drive, and I mean, there's a lot of land there, and there's a lot of roadway, and there's, the building of the streets can be pretty expensive, so it's a question of sort of negotiating and trying to determine what we're talking about precisely and what the cost would be, so certainly prepared to negotiate those types of things.
We'll see if that's suitable. Thank you. One thing I just wanted to ask Mr. McKinnon, if you wouldn't mind speaking to it, is have we ever reviewed and approved a stormwater or flood mitigation plan in the 1 in 20 zone? And maybe I'm misunderstanding. Maybe there's no distinction between the two zones in terms of water management. Maybe it's just that one floods more often. But I guess my perception would be that there would be some difference in terms of those, those two zones. So if you can help us with that, that would be great. And my other question is, with respect to a stormwater management plan, is it possible that it would involve things like holding ponds or anything like that which might have adverse consequences to the surrounding residents?
Sorry. The first question, I believe the majority of what we ever approved before were developments in the 1 in 100. I'm not sure if we've had any in the 1 in 120 or just on the edge of. I'm not sure. Mr. Fox might know more.
Yeah, most of what we've done in the past has been, as Andrew said, mostly has been in the 1 in 100. I think Omkana's development next door on Ford Street, which is just here. Portions of that site were actually in the 1 in 20, but the buildings themselves, I believe, are in the 1 in 100. So it's mostly been on the periphery of and not directly in. So this is new.
Sorry, what was the question about the stormwater detention ponds?
Just thinking of it from the perspective of the neighboring properties, and at our last meeting, we talked about the ball fields and the fact that there's been water ponds, issues for the residents, mosquitoes and all kinds of yucky things. So what type of a system would we expect to see here? And is it possible that it could have adverse consequences for the neighboring properties?
There's so many different ways they can do stormwater management. It doesn't have to be ponds, right? It could be rooftop systems, it could be cisterns under the parking lots. There's many options, so we always leave that up to the engineer.
And just to follow up on that, is it something that as long as it manages the water, it is suitable, or can we make recommendations that the system needs to be of a certain type so as not to?
Yeah, we've never dictated what type. We've always just made sure that it works mathematically. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just maybe have one other thing that I noted down, which is that it is notable that we didn't receive any feedback to the surveys. Is that typical? Is it, I think you mentioned they'd been initially put out in August. I'm just curious if anybody has any comments on that, or if you can speak to that at all. I didn't know if it was the holidays, but then I thought you had mentioned August, so.
Yeah. It doesn't say on there. Just 1 second. The development application notice signs were posted December 23rd. Information posted on the town's website on a current development application starting August 23rd, updated throughout the process. We did the mail out on January 13th. We had, part of the issues with the mail out was the Canada Post strike, so we had to wait till after that. And that may be part of the reason why there's a delay still, because there is a lag in the mail outs. Or sorry, I don't know if sorry, I shouldn't say there is a lag. I noticed that there is a lag in Canada Post delivering mail right now, so it's possible that it's still held up, but I have no reason. I don't know that for a fact. But the signs were definitely posted on the property.
Mr. Fox, getting back to this question that I asked Mr. Chisholm about buildings C and D, they were sort of in the old 1 in 120 map, and they don't have any ground floor parking. They have just surface parking. And I was just wondering, is that something that depending on the risk, but this is, these two buildings, my understanding, A and B are at a lower elevation than C and D, and yet A and B have, they've got residents on the first floor, and I would like to see parking. That would add another 24 spaces, and it would bring up the parking ratio. However, you miss out on rental room there. So what's your thoughts about that? Is that something that should be looked at? Is that part of the risk assessment,
No, again, I would be looking at this meeting our standard land use bylaw requirements. So if it meets those, I'm fine. The developer is probably going to have a concern about that level of change. I would expect that's going to increase their costs. So that's something that would have to be discussed with them, but it's not currently part of the proposal, and I don't know if it benefits the proposal in any way from a compliance with our bylaws.
Right. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Maybe I'll just see if anybody from the gallery has anything to bring to the floor. Yes, sir. Ms. Redmond, would we like a microphone? Okay.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Roy Higgins. I lived at the end of Rexdale Drive on the left side, and I own 2 properties there. And if you go down to the end of Rexdale Drive on the street, you go down to the end of the street, it drops down 3 or 4 feet. So that means that they're going to have to put something else in there to bring that up level with the street. Also, my wife is one of the Mingos that used to own a lot of that property down there. And at one time, that was a dump. It was a dump. There's all kinds of glass and everything else coming up there out of the ground. And you go down there and one day and there's nothing there, and the next day you go down there and there's glass sticking up out of the ground. So anyway, what I'm saying likely won't matter, okay? But we've had about four real serious floods, and I find it hard to talk here, so. Uh-huh.
Want to sit here?
No, this is okay. No, this is okay. Yeah. I'm just, at one time, I was offered that land from Alvin Crosman. He owned all that land going right back to the river. He offered me that land. So what me and the wife did, we went up to the town. And we said to the town, we just wanted that land so nobody would be able to build there. So we went up to, I guess it was the old Civic building that was there. We went there and we went and talked to, I'm not sure who it was now because it's been 20, 25 years ago, okay, maybe even more. And they told us, well, Mr. Higgins, why do you want to build that? Why do you want to own that land? I said, well, just so people won't build on the other side of me. And they said, oh, that's no problem. That's a floodplain. They'll never be able to build there. Never. So me and the wife took it as never. And when is never? I know laws change and everything else changes and everything, but I would own that land. And they told me that I didn't have to worry one bit about that being built on. So I didn't buy it. And that's the bad thing that I'm worried about. And those 2 big buildings there, I've lived there for over 50 years. I'd say maybe 5 years ago, they paved the street. That was 45 years without having the street. I mean, it was paved, but it was rocks, little rocks. And they also put in a fire hydrant. Well, I can see now why they put the fire hydrant in, because it's going to need to be there. So they must have been thinking about this quite a while to put that fire hydrant. And the fire hydrant's right in the front of my house. So anyway, I don't want it there. I don't want them buildings there. But like I said, my opinion doesn't matter. I don't think it will. But I just want you people to know that I had the opportunity to buy all that land right to the river. And Mark Crosman, his son, owns it now. And Mark's a pretty good friend of mine. And I put a fence around my property. So I got a new dog, and I put a fence around it. And I asked Mark, I said, Mark, do you mind if I take a little bit of your land and put my fence on there, and when you happen to sell it, I'll move my fence? He says, well, Rod, you just take as much as you want. So anyway, that's all I have to say. Things change for the better. So I've been told. But I want you people to hear what I was told 20 or 25 years ago. And I would have bought it. It would have been in my pocket. I would have bought it. But when they tell me that I can't build back there, why? They said, actually what they said to me, why do you want to do that? I said, so nobody will be able to build at the end of the street. I live at the end of the street, and it's just like living in the country. It is. It's beautiful down there. But things change. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. So I am waiting for some instruction from another committee. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Hey there, my name is Evan Price. I just wanted to clarify something. So in the motion that was on the screen earlier, it's the intent to improve the staff proposal conditional on a couple of documents being submitted. One of them is the first one there, the servicing plan. So is the intent that Design Point is going to use the CBCL study in order to create a servicing plan for water and sewer, and then that will be submitted to council later on?
Are you asking Planner Fox or the developer or the town engineer, Mr. McKinnon? Who?
I think Braun, because he would be in charge of commissioning that study.
I'm not 100% certain of what the procedure will be, Evan.
Okay.
I suspect that I'll take instructions from both the town engineers and from the developer and from Mr. Fox and just try to determine what it is exactly that they're looking for and supply them that.
Cool. Okay, yeah, I'm not for or against, just trying to clarify.
Okay.
We're using a lot of the same people, Design Point and ZAP and CBCL for a development on the other side of Salmon River, so,
There you go.
yeah, okay, cool, thanks a lot.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, well, okay. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Tynes.
Oh, yeah, I got to have something to say. I, too, have lived down the 4th Street area. I built a house there in 1973. The 4th Street side, my father owned that land. And he had a development agreement or a proposed development. That whole area, it's been mentioned, it was basically a black community. And we didn't have the services, okay? As a matter of fact, the stormwater and sewer was one line going down Ford Street. There was no other street in the town of Truro that had that. Because my kids, I remember them being small, in the wintertime, you saw that pretty blue stuff that, you put in your toilet and everything coming up and freezing. And yes, we had floods, but because there really wasn't flood management back then. But when they made the changes and started with the cut and fill, and again, I live in the Wallace, used to be Wallace, off of Park Street. And I was on council at the time, and I fought hard for the cut and fill, proper cut and fill. And I can tell you, it works. I live on the ground floor there. And I've been around, like when the boats had to come and whatever. But that's got nothing to do with those apartments. I can appreciate stormwater management and all the changes that the town of Truro is making, although I do have a lot of questions about the baseball part up on West Prince Street, but that's a whole nother issue. A whole nother issue. As far as identity goes, Ford Street, Prince Street, and Young Street have signs or plaques put up by the town of Truro, which should never ever be removed, that identifies the Ford or the hill, the island, and the marsh. I like the idea, and Mr. Chisholm and I have been talking about it, of maybe a space in there that recognizes the contributions that the black community has made. And if the cut and fill is as it's been proposed, goes through, I don't have a problem with this. The 2 new apartments that have been built, I forget the man's name, in back there, if you look, he has underground parking. But the parking for outside vehicles, if you look in back, they're well down, okay? They're not level up, they're down. And that's part of that stormwater management. You park your car there, you take your risk. At least your apartment won't be wet. I do have one concern with regards to, are these gonna be 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedroom apartments or whatever? As far as I'm concerned, that should be the developer's choice, as long as it fits in with the design that's there. I think that should be the developer's choice, but he can speak for himself on that one. I love the design. I think it's perfect. I would not build a house down there anymore, but I believe if we're going to build apartment buildings, that's where you need to build, as long as you follow the strict rules that you put in place with regards to storm management and traffic control. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Smith? We are,
Well, this is the very issue that I brought up earlier tonight. So it may be new to not new to you, but it would be new to perhaps some of the people here. And that is that the CBCL study says no residential development, no commercial development, except in very limited areas. And that's in the 1 in 100 and the 1 in 20. And so the town is making a gigantic change that is going to make a difference to people's lives who live particularly in the 1 in 20 and in addition to the 1 in 100. Last year, the town engineer said at a meeting, 1 in 20 and 1 in 100 has gone out the window. It's now 1 in 2 years flooding, 1 in 3 years flooding, 1 in 5 years flooding. So flooding is happening, and these developments can be built to protect that particular development. What it cannot do, and this is what the CBCL study talks about, is protect the existing single-family homes around that development. So we're taking a $400,000+ study that we paid for, and it's only a short period old, and we're not using it. We're basically saying, in the housekeeping issues that are going forward right now, there's issues about changing, and this gentleman talked about following the rules and following the recommendations. It talks about every development doing a hydrotechnical, hydrological, I forget the exact language, in that study on each development. We're not doing that. And that's only in the limited areas where this study said it won't cause harm to the existing single-family homes. So we're putting people at risk, their lives at risk. And we want to rush this through with this project, having most of the information, and I understand the cost side of it, but what about the cost to residents? So stormwater management, we know that the town has failed at that. Look at the Lyman Street development and the harm that happened to many residents when the flooding took place, and the flooding that's going to happen regularly. So we're making all these changes, and they're here, there, and everywhere, but they all do have a cumulative effect. The question that the councillor asked, Councillor Thomas, you know, or I think it was him or maybe a Graham, I can't remember. But what about bits and pieces here? And we're building now on 1 in 20. That project will probably be safe because they'll have the money. But what about its effect on the other homes? Or are we just simply going to say, and it's referenced in the full CBCL study, not the one that was created that has all the important stuff pulled out of it, like the safety issue, restricting development. Are we going to let everybody know what's really in that study?
Ms. Smith, I'll just remind you, we discussed this evening that the full study is available, okay?
It is
So,
now.
so
I agree, it is now. But
so
is
let's-
the council going to use it?
Sure. I don't want people to feel, which it seems to be coming through in what you're saying, that the study is being kept from people, and that isn't the case, okay? So I just
I'm
want to
only
clarify
talking-
that.
I'm only talking about what was provided last year when we were talking intensively about it, and that in the public consultation that led up to the new community plan, there was no talk about not following the CBCL study, that it wasn't going to be adhered to, that there was going to be this kind of intensity development in the 1 in 20 floodplain.
And another thing I want to note, and Mr. McKinnon can speak to this more than I can, but every time that we have discussed a stormwater management plan with the engineering department, we have been assured that the definition of a suitable stormwater management plan is that it will cause no greater water risk to surrounding homes than is presently in place. So to indicate that the developments are going to create a risk for those surrounding property areas does not fit with this committee's understanding of a stormwater management plan.
And
Now,
I'm not saying it will. I say the potential exists. Very strong.
Okay,
Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to clarify, because that is what you did say. And so, Mr. McKinnon, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we need to clarify what a stormwater management plan is, because that is a condition of a development that this committee puts in place regularly. So I think it's important for us to understand what that means.
Can I add to that question? How old is the current stormwater management plan that the town uses? How old is that study?
We don't have a stormwater management plan. We instruct everybody to do the stormwater management plan based on a 1 in 100 year flood.
And 1 in 20?
No, we do 1 in 100. That's stricter.
Okay.
So we do
And-
1 in 100.
And so the stormwater management study that's referenced in the community plan that is old and that we need a new one, is there a new one, or do you have the age of that other study?
You're
that-
you're talking flood study. I'd like to go back and answer her questions.
Okay.
You're talking flood study, not stormwater management study.
No, I'm talking stormwater management.
Yeah, well, stormwater management is a plan that an engineer does site-specific for everything. So we don't have that in our plan. What's in our plan is the flood study. And yes, stormwater management plans are to ensure that there is no more water flowing off a site post-development than what that was pre-development on any sites in town. When it's on the marsh, when it's on the floodplain, there's another component that they also have to make sure the floodways are maintained as well. So it's two components to it. So it's not just stormwater management on these sites, it's floodwater management and stormwater management. So they have to do two things.
Last question then. Is there going to be a hydrotechnical study? I think it's referenced in the housekeeping plan for this specific project. Because if I understand the CBCL study, if you're building here and you go 150, 200 yards down the road to build somewhere else, it can have two very, very different flooding aspects to it. Is this plan going to have that kind of a study done for their particular project?
That's not part of our requirements, no.
Yeah. But it is in the CBCL plan, study, that it's recommended for every project.
Oh, okay, I'll have to look that up.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are, Councillor McGrath, and go ahead.
Sorry, yes, thank you, Madam Chair, at the risk of extending this longer. Mr. McKinnon, I know at council before I've asked you some of the questions regarding, say, the detention ponds and other stormwater management techniques, and that we were working on making those even stricter because, as you have said, or as Ms. Smith says that you have said, that you know, we all know the storms are getting worse. I don't know that you said, you know, they're now 1 and 2 or 1 and 3. I don't recall that, but I know the storms are getting worse. And I had questioned you before on, are we making our stormwater restrictions stricter? And I think you said you were looking into that. Can you take, I don't know, 30 seconds and run us through a quick overview?
I'll try to, but no, we still do it based on a 1 in 100 year flood, but your IDF curves, your intensity, duration, and frequency of rainfall events those charts are growing year after year as the storm data builds. So the information, the data that the engineers use behind it is getting stricter. Which basically accommodates for climate change, and that's what the 1 in 100 year flood does as well.
Right, thank you.
Okay, well, does any member of the committee wish to put forward a motion regarding this project for this evening?
Excuse me, could I say something again, please? It won't take long.
Okay, if you keep,
Like I told you, I don't need the mic. No, I don't need, I'm not going to be very.
Need a mic.
you, for the television audience, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
We can hear you fine, but on TV.
Okay. Oh, I forget what I was going to say. Yeah, like I told you last meeting, that I've been in the Truro Fire Brigade for 30 years. We had to go on Marshland Drive to rescue a lot of elderly people. The last flood we had, and if we put 4 more buildings in that area, and they're retirement people, how many more people are we going to have to rescue if, which is a big word, if we do have the flood? That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Just for clarity on that one thing that you did mention, we did confirm with Mr. Chisholm this is not a retirement, like his company is called Wallace Retirement Living. This is not a building for retirees. I'm sure they're welcome, but it is not geared for the elderly population. Okay.
That same apartment building he's talking about, I lived on Ford Street at the time, and they had to bring a boat to my house.
Okay.
Not just the apartment.
Thank you. Councillor Graham.
Mr. Fox, could you advise us, please, on the motion as to whether or not we should include the part about the onus being on the developer to do the extension of Ford Street? I was really unclear on
That
how.
isn't, you can include it in the motion. Yes,
Is that your advice, that it be included there?
it doesn't hurt. So yes, feel free to add it to the motion.
I think if I could just add to that, I mean,
Could you help?
we spoke with the developer, and he indicated it would be a point of discussion and negotiation. So I think, and I'm not saying we should do one thing or the other, but if you want something specific in the motion that, it is 50% and no less of the cost or something to that extent, then that would be the recommendation. But I would expect council could, just like they could accept parts of our recommendation and toss other parts aside, it would always come to the council's decision, right?
Okay, I just needed help with, if we were going to include it, the appropriate way to include it. So I'll leave it to you as our chair and Mr. Fox as our developer to do that.
I guess before we get to the wording that deals with cost sharing of the infrastructure improvement, the recommendation which has been provided by staff is that council approves the application by Wallace Retirement Living to develop 4 multi-unit residential buildings containing 170 to 190 dwelling units at 4648 Ford Street and 2238 Rexdale Drive, subject to the submission and approval of a servicing plan, stormwater management and flood mitigation plan, and a traffic impact study. Is there any change to that wording by the committee, such as any change that we've discussed regarding parking, height of any of the buildings, and the quality of the flood mitigation and stormwater management plan? Not that it be necessarily suitable, but that it have certain qualities that maybe haven't been mandated in the past. Or are we fine with the wording as presented? And if so, please let me know.
I think it's fine as it's wording. It says approval of a servicing plan, which involves the service to the site, which is then under negotiation. So I think it's quite inclusive, and so I'd like to just vote on the motion as presented by the planning department.
Okay, and I would add to Councillor Graham's point that the committee recommends to council to enter into negotiations with the developer regarding cost sharing required for the site to upgrade the municipal services on Ford Street and possibly other servicing streets or surrounding streets. Does that work for you?
I think it does. Does that include, like when you say servicing, does that include the actual infrastructure of the road, the street? Does that?
I think I said municipal infrastructure updates. If not, if that could be
And
reflected.
I think the town engineer also indicated that any improvements required as a result of the traffic impact study. That'll identify those needs.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Are you okay with that, Ms. Redmond? Okay. Councillor McGrath, I think I cut you out of the mic line, so.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I was just trying to help get us to the finish line of the motion, but it sounds like we're there, so I withdraw.
Can I accept Councillor Thomas's motion together with the language that I added and Councillor McGrath's second? Is everyone okay with that? Okay, the motion is on the table. Is there further discussion, or would somebody like to call for the question? Okay, all those in favor with the motion which has been put in the record, please identify by signify by saying aye. Aye. Any contrary minded, please signify by saying nay. Okay, thank you. Motion carried. Thank you, Mr. Chisholm.
Thank you. Thank you, members.
Okay, the next item on the agenda, if I could find my, is 730 Yonge Street. This is step 1 in the expanded process for the development agreement. The applicant is Aquaba Developments, Inc. The project is Ms. Connolly's Senior Planner and Development Officer, so I will have her start with her summary, please.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. As mentioned, this is step 1 of the application process. The subject site is located at 730 Yonge Street. You will not know where that is because a civic number has just been assigned to it. They are undeveloped lands at the top of Yonge Street, just past the entrance to the rail yard mountain bike park. They're approximately 22.5 acres in area. However, only 15.4 are proposed to be developed. You can see that they're highlighted on the map on the screen. Lands have approximately 795 meters of frontage on Yonge Street. Lands are within the future growth policy area. Multiple unit residential proposals with more than 50 units shall be considered by development agreement. They are also zoned future growth as well as environmental reserve and urban growth, and residential development with more than 18 units shall be considered by development agreement as per policy UG 35 of the town's land use bylaw. Subject site, we have some exciting photos to see. So some of the land is cleared. I've done a little inset map for your reference to show where it was approximately taken. This is an existing ponding area that's on the site along Yonge Street, part of the development. And here we have a section, a treed section of the lands also to be developed. As mentioned, this is step 1 of the application process. Staff are recommending the 5-step expanded evaluation process due to the size of the application. This is a site plan of the proposed development. So you can see it's a rather large proposal. 276 dwelling units are proposed, and those are split between 19 buildings, 3 of which are 4-story multi-units and a mixture of stacked 2-story townhouses as well as regular 2-story townhouses. Here we have a 3D conceptual site plan of the proposed development. It gives you a little bit of a sense of what that would look like in that third dimension, I should say. So again, the proposal varies in height between 2 and 4 stories with 276 total units. Building mix, again, varies between 3 4-story multi-units and then some 2-story townhouses. Lot coverage for the entire site would be about 27%, which would include the buildings as well as the parking and paved areas. Thank you, Councillor Thomas, for bringing this to my attention earlier, but I did make a slight error in my parking calculations. It does appear that there will be at least 1 parking space per unit as proposed, but this may change and shift as the proposal goes through the evaluative criteria. And we do have the developers here, the applicant is here, who may be able to speak to that in a little bit more detail, should the committee wish. Some amenity space is proposed as part of this development, and you can see it's kind of shown here where the existing pond is. There is a trail kind of shown going around it. That is some amenity space. There may also be some amenity space that comes forward in the form of common rooms and common space within the multi-units, as well as balconies and backyard space. So that, again, will come out as it goes through the evaluation process. So, as mentioned, the expanded 5-step process is recommended. Development application notice signs will be posted on the lands in the coming weeks, so that will let all residents and the traveling public know that the site is being considered for a development agreement. The information has already been posted on the town's website under active development applications, so please check that out if you have any questions. And a mail out will also be sent out to property owners within 150 meters of the subject lands regarding the public hearing notification. As next steps, this will be going forward in front of their Planning Advisory Committee at least twice more for a second and third meeting. These will include the evolution, any changes that the developer and applicant make to the submission and proposal. Those will be brought forward to the committee for consideration, and a full staff report with the third meeting, as we just witnessed with the other application prior to this one. And that will be at the third meeting. as well as a final public hearing. That concludes my presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Connolly. Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Connolly. I have one quick question, just because you used a term, and I hadn't noticed it in the plan when I was doing my review, but you used the term stacked townhouses, which is one I'm not familiar with. Can you educate, please?
Sure, I can, or I could actually have I could let the developer explain that, since they're going to design it, what that actually would look like, if you wish.
If they would like to come down here and introduce themselves?
Hi there. Please feel free to introduce yourself and speak clearly into the microphone. Thank
Sure.
you.
Hi, my name's Greg Zwicker. I'm a planner with ZAP. We're the applicant on file. With me tonight are Ethan and Ernest from Aquabot Developments sitting back here. So they are the actual developer. I'm the applicant and the planner. The stacked townhouses in the red really means there's a unit above. So on the first floor you might have a 1-bedroom, and on the second floor you might have a 2-bedroom above. Those would be more of a rental as opposed to a regular stacked town side by side. So you get double the density, but also allows some efficiency for cost of construction and rental rates and putting a variety of units on the market. Where the single development standard townhouses will be at least 2 floors, those can get expensive. This allows us to put another extra unit in there and provide a rental product on the market.
So when we're talking the regular townhouses versus stacked townhouses, are the stacked townhouses taller, or is the regular townhouse just a 2-story that's shared, one family with 2 floors?
We've done both. We've done the stacked where it's 3 units and you put one sort of half underground. It's a 1-bedroom down there, and then you put a 2-bedroom, 2-bath on the second and third above. We need a little bit of time to figure out that.
Okay.
The idea here was to put at least 3 different product on the maps to allow different entries sort of into that market.
Well, I certainly value having options.
Yeah.
Mr. Zwicker, thank you. No further questions at this time.
Sure.
Councillor Thomas.
I like the idea that you have mixed housing there, various forms of housing. I think that's great. Just wondering about those single, more traditional single townhouse. Well, those, could someone purchase those? Those are someone can purchase those?
Yeah, so as they're set up there, it would be there's 2 ways of managing it. Either it's a condo corp and you would buy into that corporation.
Sure.
Or it's a rental product. You can see they're not all subdivided off of the street in individual lots, so it would be one of those 2 models.
I'm hoping there's a market to sell it.
Ideally, that's right.
Because I think that that's very helpful for the overall economy of the country and of the province and even the town.
Yeah.
If people having ownership of real estate, I think that's an important part of someone's personal portfolio.
Definitely, yeah, we agree with
So
that.
I think that's a positive thing. I'm just wondering about these parking lots, like the 61 unit parking lot. There's some restrictions on that, and I just want to make sure, we talked about that, Carla, but, Ms. Connolly, but I was wondering, Ms. Connolly, we will ensure that some of those bylaws will be applied to that 61 so it's just not an expanse of asphalt or a breakup. There'll be some landscaping in it, et cetera, to cool the area, et cetera, and make it more visually pleasing.
Correct.
Yeah.
The town's bylaw is pretty clear. It has design standards for parking lots with over a certain number of spaces. So yes, those will be applied to this.
Yeah, I would like that applied, in this development agreement. The other thing is just landscaping in general, it's just that these are like streets in many ways, right? And I like to see a streetscape there. I like to, and the Urban Forest Committee has got some native and near native species. They have a list of them that they can recommend to you. And these species should do well under climate change. And they're very nice species and pest tolerant, except because they're more native, right? And so the idea is to make them more resilient. And I think that would really help you development. And I don't know, Mr. Fox, is he still, Mr. Fox? I would like to suggest that in this particular case, I would like to see a landscape plan? Because I like to see streetscapes. Is that, I'm asking you but
We
Ms.
can
Conley.
certainly request a landscaping plan with details around plantings. We can do that, again, it could be one of those things that's a condition of approval. It can be something that we ask for up front. That's really,
Well, I'd like to see sort of a plan attached to it, maybe not detailed, and then require a detailed one, but some ideas of what the idea would be, Ms. Conley, as you know, those streetscapes, develop some sort of streetscape.
You making that point tonight, Councillor Thomas, is great, as we have the developer and the applicant here, so they are hearing your comments and your feedback, so you can take that home with you and maybe incorporate some of that information into the next iteration of the development submission.
Yeah, and everybody says that I'm crazy on parking, but I'm not. I just want to make sure that, it's your development, and you have to make sure that you have enough parking.
Yep.
But there's no off-site parking on this site.
Right.
And it's far enough from town that it's too far to walk. So there's the need for vehicles. And right now, when you add it all up, as you have it set out now, it's essentially one car per unit, one parking spot per unit.
Yep.
And you know, you can work with the planning department, but I personally believe that it should be higher than that, you know, closer to 1.5 or so. But then, you know, then you get a lot more pavement, you know, and things like that, which is undesirable. So there has to be right, you know, but I worry about just one car being sufficient, because then I don't know where these other cars are going to go, right? They can't go on Yonge Street, you know, and so where are they going to park, you know, right? And so anyways, I'll leave that with you. That's a concern I have.
That's fair. It's a good question. There's lots of space. We could park all over this site, but it's worse for runoff. It's worse for the environment. It's worse for all sorts of things. Maybe, and I'm just thinking on the spot, what we could do is set aside some areas for future parking or expanded parking. So if we find this is getting used, that we can have an additional expanded area where we could push out later on and add some more in, but we don't have to necessarily be required to do it all out of the gate. We could plan for it.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to go a little bit opposite direction as Deputy Mayor Thomas in looking for ways to reduce the need for parking. He has correctly identified that, yes, the distance from the downtown is certainly a barrier for non-vehicular travel, especially, I mean, I'm an avid cyclist, but I'm not going up Yonge Street on my bike often. It's a slog, even on my little e-bike. It's a tough one. So I don't expect people to be doing a lot of running their groceries back and forth that way. However, with car share schemes and companies, if you were to reach out to them to see if they were interested in setting up shop in Truro. I know it's been looked into before. I think they've said we don't have the population, but it's in my time on council, and it's only been a short time, there have been many developments coming through. We've got a lot more people moving in. I think the 2021 census indicated we were at about 12,000 people. I think we're probably going to see more closer to 15 or 16,000 in the next census. The town is growing, which is a wonderful thing, but I would encourage you to look into car share and reaching out to them. It would help save some of that, the undesirable asphalt, as you said. And just looking at numbers, the lot coverage, we've got approximately 27% impermeable surface, 8% is buildings, which means 19% of the development area is dedicated to cars, parking, roadway. Yep. That's a significant percent. And when we're trying to make things affordable and get more people housed, certainly that space maybe could be put to better use if we had car share or public transit that could access the space. Now, I know I just said people probably aren't running their groceries by bicycle from that section. However, your proximity to the rail yard mountain bike park, that might change things, where you might really want to consider ensuring that you have sufficient bicycle parking. I'm trying to, where's the map here? Because not only are you, as Ms. Connolly pointed out, just up from the main entrance to the rail yard, you are also not far from Seek Wilderness Accommodations, where there is another trailhead entrance into the park. And I could see a lot of people do move here for the rail yard. That was a big draw when I moved here. That might be a good target market for you, cyclists who really want to be right there on the rail yard. Is it more important for them to be able to walk to the grocery store once a week, or do they want to be out the door and in the park in 5 minutes every day after work?
Yep.
Right? So I would encourage you to make sure that you've got sufficient bicycle parking and look at that potential target market. And then hopefully, if you have a lot of those cyclists, maybe we could reduce the amount of parking that's required and repurpose some of that parking area for some of the lovely trees that Deputy Mayor has recommended for you.
Yes, thank you. The bike trails in there are amazing.
They are.
My buddies and I, we fat biked that last week.
Nice.
And it's amazing to come out of there at 10 o'clock at night and see people going in to bike or ski. If it's cold and frozen, they ride those trails all night. I think you have an amenity here. Well, I know you do. I'm from the city, and my buddies leave the city and drive up here to ride this park. Like, you have an attraction that is now a Nova Scotia, if not further and beyond. It's pulling that community in. I think it's a chance to build off of that and that energy and that outdoor environment, to try to link this in with Seek and with the park and sort of a green, this is a energy efficient, net zero type of situation. So I think there's a story that weaves all that together to make something interesting up here. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate the shout out, and I'll say it explicitly for the Truro Parks Recreation and Culture staff who maintain the park, as well as the Bike Truro volunteers who do a lot of the fat bike grooming in the winter. I also just wanted to echo what Deputy Mayor Thomas had mentioned regarding rental versus ownership. We stress the mix of housing options, because everybody has different housing needs. What works for one may not work for another. Certainly there are people who are in a position to own and are looking for that option, and there are certainly people who wish to rent. But there's an awful lot of rental in this town, and I would like to see more options for people to take ownership and have those options. I really appreciate the options.
Okay.
And that's all my questions. Thank you. And I look forward to chatting more at the next meeting.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Councillor Graham.
It's too early probably in the process to answer the question, but again, I always like to encourage 3-bedroom units for families.
In those townhouses and stacked townhouses, we have some room to do that. Where the buildings are more 1s and 2s, the townhouses are ideal for 2s and 3s.
Great.
So that gives us a spectrum right across.
Good.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And those townhouses, I think, would have yards. That was the intention, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for, so we won't have a motion this evening. We've just provided some feedback. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you at the next meeting.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're really glad you're up high, eh?
Okay, our next agenda item is the property at 67 Inglis Place, which is at step 2 of the application process. And this is Mr. Fox's project with Factory 58 Holdings Incorporated. So he will speak to where we are now with that project.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the development agreement application for 67 Inglis, it is by Factory 58 Holdings Limited, or Mitch Cook, who was at the last meeting. I think we have representatives, here this evening as well. This application was made on December 11th, 2024. It is a mixed-use development proposal consisting of 30 units and 3,500, or about 1,088 square meters of street-level commercial space and a parking area for 21 vehicles. This is at step 2. There hasn't been a lot of changes to the application since the last meeting, so this might be a bit repetitive because there really hasn't been. There was some some suggestive sort of feedback at last meeting, but there wasn't really any conclusive direction to make some serious changes. So there hasn't been any changes made by the applicant at this stage. So at this point, really, it's about just to provide feedback for the developer, some more concrete direction if that's required, or if the committee feels it's necessary. So we did go through step one already. That happened back in December, and there was a lengthy discussion about parking. There's also questions about bicycle parking, accessibility, affordability, need for loading space. There was talk about loitering in the covered terrace. There was talk about curbing, landscaping around the parking lot, or something a barrier to prevent vehicles from going into the sort of pedestrian realm. There's talk about public washrooms, and there's also talk about some of the materials that were being used in the proposal. And I can also note that since the last meeting, this also went to the Heritage Advisory Committee, and the Heritage Advisory Committee has requested details around the materials that are going to be used. The applicant confirmed parking requirements are met. Participation in CMHC Affordable Housing Program was also confirmed. And then there's also landscaping around the parking area, which he had agreed to as well. There were no other changes arising from the questions. So as I mentioned, we're now at step two. So really nothing new has changed since the last step, and really looking for, at this point, since we have done some public notification, there's been, I think the sign's been posted on the subject property, and so now we'd be looking for the public to start getting involved in the process. So 67 English Place, it's shown here outlined in blue. Existing parking lot for, I think it's around 30, is it?
43, I believe.
43? Okay. And it's about 1,486 square meters in area. The property has about 48 meters of frontage on Esplanade, 24 meters of frontage on English Place, and about 34 meters of frontage on Havelock. Oh yeah, and as I mentioned, yeah, it's 43 parking spaces in the parking lot. This is a shot of the parking lot shown here. Subject property is situated in the heart of Truro's business district and occupies a high-profile corner. 2 major shopping streets, areas characterized by traditional commercial architecture, 2- and 3-story buildings, situated at the street, so no setbacks, no parking lots in the front yards for most parts, buildings tight to the street. And the result of that type of development is really more a welcoming and inviting pedestrian environment, so we want to continue with that. A notable exception to all this, of course, is the Truro Center development located right across the street, which is a 1-story building with parking in the front, and it's a little bit less inviting pedestrian environment. Subject lands are within the downtown core policy area. Land uses in the area are primarily commercial with office, professional uses, street level retail, and restaurants. There are a few residential uses on upper floors. Other nearby uses include large multi-unit residential buildings on Victoria Street, and some new development, of course, across the tracks on Yonge Street. And as I mentioned, lands are within the downtown core policy area. There's also regional service, which is across on the other side of Truro Center. So really everything in that area is a downtown core policy area, and the lands are zoned downtown commercial, downtown core, and again outlined in blue here. Showing the zoning, the proposed site plan or ground floor and site plan is shown here. Applicant has submitted preliminary plans for mixed use development consisting of 4-story building with 30 units. And that 1,088 square meters of commercial space, which is on the ground floor, which is what's shown here. This plan shows the commercial space in sort of the, I'm not sure that shows up as red or orangey, sort of peach color, I guess, on your plans. And then there's the yellow, which is a covered terrace, and then there's another commercial space over here. The gray is circulation, mechanical storage, elevators, that type of thing. There's also a garbage and or like waste room here with storage as well. And then there's the residential lobby here, which gains access to the stairwell and the elevator. So this is the covered terrace that goes between Esplanade and to the parking lot in the back. This is Grow and Brew over in this area, and this is where the parking lot is being proposed to be developed in the center of the site for 21 vehicles, including 1 accessible stall. And it's directly accessible via Havelock Street. And this area here is the covered terrace area, which is amenity space potentially for the use of the development, or potentially for tenants, commercial tenants. There's 208 square meters of covered terrace. And then That's really the only other detailed design elements at this time haven't really been finalized, but the upper floors do show 30 units, 3 bachelor, 15 one-bedroom, 12 two-bedroom units. The site is approximately 46.5% impermeable coverage, lot coverage, and there's about 99% impermeable surface, but that's really not a big change from what's there now, except that there's probably more green space being proposed, because I think the intention is to have some green space outside along the edges of the parking area. Proposal features a surface parking area, as I mentioned, for 21 vehicles. Parking ratio is 0.7 spaces per dwelling unit, which meets the bylaw requirements. Units do not include balconies, and there is no interior amenity space proposed at this time, although the applicant did mention that possibility of doing some amenity space rooftop at the last meeting. Development does feature, again, the covered terrace at the ground level. And these are just some renderings showing the floor layouts. So there's the 4-story building. This is the ground floor here, showing that covered terrace with the 2 commercial spaces, and then there's the upper floor, 3 upper floors with residential units. And then there's some renderings of the site showing the proposed development with brick on the lower level at grade, and then which would match the existing streetscape. And then there's upper floors would be I believe the intent was a metal siding, but from details more on the siding might be forthcoming from the applicant. Representatives who are here. So there's just some more renderings. This one shows how it fits into the streetscape in terms of the old Margolians building there. And the new proposal on the right-hand side has some more detail here, showing, again, this is just the corner of Esplanade and Inglis. And this would be a view of the site, or the proposed building from the intersection of Esplanade and Havelock. And this is a view of the proposed covered terrace, which leads through into the parking lot and the Grow and Brew on the other side. And there's just some potential ideas about how the space might be used, if there's like an abutting use that's a coffee shop or a restaurant or food service of some sort that might be utilized by that space. And then this is the enabling policy, DC 74, which just talks about having multiple units being considered by development agreement, subject to the criteria found in Chapter 14, implementation, which we'll go over in detail at the next meeting. The development application notice sign has been posted on the subject properties. Information on the town's website under active development applications will be updated, and we will do a mail out to the property owners following this meeting as well, that are within 150 meters of the site. So as I mentioned, we're at step 2. So at this point, members are expected to provide further direction to the developer regarding suggested changes to address public feedback and to better conform to the town's planning policies and objectives. Also at this meeting, the applicant may commit to additional changes to address feedback and better conform to the town's planning policies and objectives. And then once we've settled on a conceptual design, the application will proceed to step 3. When we'll actually conduct that online survey, prepare a staff report and recommendation, and the results of the survey along with the staff report will go to that 3rd meeting. And that's tentatively scheduled to be 24th of February. And then after that, the committee would make its recommendation and would proceed presumably to a public hearing in April. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. If you 2 gentlemen would like to come down, you can move one of those chairs down to the desk if you like. And if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves. I have Councillor McGrath in the queue and then Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you gentlemen want to introduce yourselves first.
Sure. My name is Brant Quist. I'm owner of the Axios Construction, just here representing the developer as he's out of the country at this time.
Okay.
Yeah, Steve Rogan with Rural Roots Engineering. We're working with engineering on the project, kind of working with the architects as well, so they're also not available tonight.
Great, thank you. So that's Mr. Quist and Mr. Rogan? Got those
Rogan.
correct? Perfect. My first question actually is for Mr. Fox. I thank you for clarifying that I wasn't crazy that there weren't a lot of changes from the previous meeting to today. And I know you say we didn't necessarily prescribe a lot of changes, but I thought we had really good dialogue with Mr. Cook We had a lot of positive suggestions. I guess what I was expecting, and I don't want to speak for the rest of the committee members, was that those suggestions would have been considered and brought back to say, yes, we can include these, or no, we can't, or here's some other options that we may have based on some of that feedback that we were given. What I see is basically the same. Did any of that feedback or suggestion land? Was any of it discussed? Was it all turned away?
No, it was discussed. We don't have any like updates, like visual updates to the presentation, like from step 1 to step 2, I guess, to present to you today. I have been in meetings, I guess, with Mr. Cook and the designers. They mentioned like a lot of those things, the you know, the bike amenities, the protection, you know, from vehicle traffic being able to access like the covered terrace, the emphasis on having some greenery, some trees, like some landscape stuff. Basically, I think I wasn't present like for the first meeting, but just having participated in subsequent meetings from the step 1 meeting, it seemed to me that the feedback in general from the designers and Mr. Cook was pretty much comply with all of it.
Okay, great, because I know we had talked about, yeah, potential vehicle access into that covered terrace, so using bollards or something prettier than bollards, perhaps, that maybe...
I think these guys would be good at that, yeah.
Yeah, and certainly the bicycle parking, I know Mr. Cook enjoys some time on a bicycle as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know, at this point, I don't know what I'm supposed to ask, because there's nothing different than what we had the first time. So I guess my question to you guys is, yeah, is there anything that's changed other than that, you know, you say a lot of those suggestions have been considered and likely to be included. Does that include Councillor Graham's, you know, much desired downtown bathroom? I mean, I know she's been fighting for it for many years, and I agree that it's something that would certainly benefit the downtown. Is that included? Are the bollards included? Are we using street trees instead of bollards? Like, I'm looking for details, I guess.
Yeah. I guess, like I said, like I don't have anything visually that I could obviously present in the presentation in this evening. If that's needed, we can certainly ask Mr. Cook and the designers to submit them. And I don't know if it needs to be like visual, just like the slides that we've seen this evening, or it can be like a letter that just talks about like design intent. I guess that'd be my question as well, as like what would be acceptable.
I don't think that there's any, I mean, those little things like a bicycle parking or bollards or trees, I mean, yeah, sure.
Yeah, well, especially, you know, when I don't know if you came through our new Willow Street roundabout this afternoon, but
I was there 5 minutes after the crash.
Yeah, so that seems to be, if you know, motor vehicles will sometimes go places where they're not supposed to, and we should protect against that wherever possible, especially in a downtown neighborhood where we want people out walking and enjoying the area.
And there is for sure grade separation.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not shown. It's not at the, you know, we're not the civil design part of that yet, but there's for sure grade separation anyway.
Okay.
You'd be really trying hard to get in there with the vehicle.
Okay, so when you say grade separation, you just mean like a curb step up from the road on the sidewalk.
And on the other side too. Yeah. So when you're looking at the parking area will be below that elevation of the walkway, or what do we call it? The covered terrace, yeah.
Okay. Actually, I was just going to use that slide. The one with the parking lot and the cars in it. The one previous, please. Thank you, sir. So when you're talking about the grade separation, let's say if vehicle number 17 there went to go put their car into reverse and back out of that spot, but they accidentally put it into drive and drove forward, they're not going to go through that terrace. They're going to hit some sort of barrier to prevent them from doing damage other than to people anyway.
Oh, for sure.
Okay. That's a wonderful thing, and that's sort of some of the details that I'm looking for. Because I will say, I mean, you've been here this whole meeting. Bless you for that.
Yeah.
This came across. It was a very detailed first plan, one of the more detailed first plans that I've seen so far. But yeah, I guess I was just looking for something a little more. So that would be my request. If I have to make it an actual You know, a directive, I guess, would be to see more details on the things that we've discussed. You know, what are we doing? Are we doing these bathrooms? Are we doing the amenity rooftops? What kind of grade separation are we doing? So you mentioned a curb, Mr. Quist, or Mr. Rogan, sorry. But I don't know. I see a lot of people parked on sidewalks. I don't consider a standard curb as sufficient, you know, curb, you know, separation, I guess.
Yeah, and I could speak to that a little bit. Like in one of the meetings that I was present for, it was, especially on the Esplanade side of it, it was definitely considered something that was more robust than like an 8-inch curb. Something that's architectural, that goes with the architecture that you find at like on the building's facade. But
Right, but there wouldn't be anything there any different than any other building on any street in Truro.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, and I agree with that. I take that point, but not every other building on Truro has a covered terrace that somebody might want to try to shortcut through. I'll use this example of a drunk driver who tried to make a turn and ended up inside my neighbor's house. Sometimes somebody who is not paying as close attention might see that, think it's a roadway or an entrance into that parking lot, and try to make that turn. And I think that's something that we should try to prevent them from doing, especially if there is a cafe there, dozens of people enjoying a coffee and a bagel or whatever, and then suddenly there's a motor vehicle in their midst.
We have on-street amenities all down Prince Street all summer long. So I just want to be clear, like, I don't think we will protect it as reasonable as we can be, but I don't think we want to have a fence or anything like this along there that would be deleterious to the look of the building or make snow clearing a problem. That's my comment back.
And I agree with that. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, sir. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just what I'm saying is that's just sort of standard with this type of thing.
Yeah, I don't want to see fencing either. I want our downtown to look even better than it already is, right? I want to see those improvements, but I do have the concern that somebody's just going to see that gap and think that they can go through it. And so having either some mature trees, I'm sure Deputy Mayor Thomas can make some recommendations on which ones to use, but having something there that just helps with the streetscape and such.
There's no space for trees there.
No space for trees? Okay. Perhaps using the existing planters might be sufficient at the edge of the terrace.
Maybe.
Yeah, something. Anyway, that's the ball. That is my request. Something that improves the streetscape, but also enhances the safety. And again, you're right that there's lots of things all down Prince and Esplanade and all the downtown streets. It's just that opening, as beautiful and wonderful as I think that will be, my concern is just somebody's going to try to use that as an opening and cause some harm. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just a couple of questions here. Really, probably two to the town planner and one to you folks. I'm just wondering, we've talked about parking again, and the thing is, it meets the requirements for parking for residential, but it doesn't meet the requirements for parking for commercial space. And I did a quick math, and if it's retail space, there's a requirement for 18 spaces,
Excuse me, Mr. Thomas, or Councillor Thomas, there is no parking requirement for commercial in the downtown.
I know,
Okay.
but
just wanted to be clear, the way you stated that made it sound like there is, so.
Right.
Yeah.
But there is 18. If you figured it out, so many square feet, which is 195 square feet per, and then you figure it all out. It's kind of like it requires some parking. Like, let's be realistic. It requires some parking because if it is a retail space, people are going to drive their cars to that area. My question is this, is with English Street and what's being proposed for no parking on English Street, at least for part of the year, is there any study looking at parking in the area for commercial use in the area? With that taking place, because that's a consideration, and the merchants on English Street are thinking about this, and everybody's thinking about this, and I want to know if this building is part of that consideration, you know, that commercial space and the need for parking for people to shop there, plus shopping on Inglis. Is there enough parking? Is there a study going on about that, or are we just going to say no parking is required for commercial space, therefore we're not going to think about it?
There is no study that I'm aware of about parking, and I think you know that. There's certainly not one being done by the town. As far as the parking requirements go, we just went through the plan review process, which I know you're also part of, and we discussed at length the idea about parking and the need for parking in downtown, and it was decided that our approach to downtown parking was going to be, we're going to be reducing the requirement. And that's what's being applied to this development. That's the standard being applied here. We're not penalizing one developer because they do meet the requirements, but we're going to ask them to do something above and beyond or provide parking to address some greater need. That's not what's been proposed. That's not what council sought when we did plan review. So I see the parking issue as being addressed on this site as far as I'm concerned.
It's certainly addressed for the residential part of it. It meets the bylaw.
Just to be clear, it does meet the commercial parking requirements for downtown. There is none.
Correct.
So it meets it.
Because there is none. This is to you fellows here. It's an important corner in the town. It's the downtown. It's one of the major downtown corners, right? And from a streetscape perspective, it's important. I believe it's important. It's one of those key corners in town that it's meaningful what gets put there. I was wondering, is the architect going to come in sometime before us? Does he plan to come before us?
We have two architects working on this. They've developed this. They just weren't available tonight.
Okay. Do you think they'll be available at some time? Or is that?
I would expect them to be here the very next time.
Okay, that would be great.
Regrets for sure, and I 100% agree with you. That was my first comment. Councillor Thomas, when I was aware of this project, I said, this is an important corner for Truro.
Right, it is. Yeah, it's important that the building look good, and
Yeah.
and in fact, it lifts the area up. It doesn't just become just another building, but it lifts the area up as you know, a considerable building, you know, a foundation building, you know, of some sort. That's how I see it. And so it's important to me that the renderings that you present, you know, are not just sort of, well, you know, it's going to look kind of like this. I want some assurance that it's going to look like this, that the renderings that you present, that's what the building's going to look like, because that's important. So
yeah, it's a very good comment, and I just want to go back to, like, we've had some pretty deep discussions about even things like heating and ventilation equipment, and how that would be mounted on the building,
Right,
not
right.
seen. And
I appreciate that.
we're pretty aware of it, and yeah, I wish the architects were here to respond to give you more of their vision for it,
Right,
which
right.
they do have here.
Yeah, they're very good.
Excellent.
Very lucky to have.
Well, thanks for that assurance. One last thing. And Mr. Fox, we do have some trees on English Street. And then I know that, is it possible that there could be some trees along the other side of the street or along English Street there, you know, like right around the corner of this building, so that it's on the Esplanade side as well? Is that possible?
Does not look like there's sufficient land there, nor would I really anticipate them pushing the building back further than adjacent
No, you
structures.
can't. Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
So I think to keep with the existing built form, keep the building set close to the street. Any tree plantings that do happen on English Place would be on town land in a bump out landscaped island like that, not landscape island, but a bump out.
Right.
And
okay,
similar to
fair
what we
enough.
have there currently, we could do something like that.
Yeah, I understand
Yeah.
that design requirement. Yeah, so thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. I echo Councillor Thomas's point about the corner, and it's really nice to hear that you appreciate that. Obviously, in the line of work you do, I think you would. So excited to see, as Councillor Thomas mentioned, something just sort of giving us a bit more. And the application the last time was very well presented. So I think it will be, we look forward to seeing those renderings even more complete the next time. I will just push back a little bit on the parking because I am a strong proponent of people over parking. And from my review of this, we are losing some parking spaces, but we are gaining a lot of people who would be living in the downtown, and presumably our businesses would appreciate people living on the streets that they will be shopping rather than just having parking spaces. So I look forward to possibly, up to, from my calculations, we could have 72 people living in that building, at least 40. So I think that will be more beneficial to the downtown than the detriment of losing a few parking spaces. So looking forward to that. On the downtown note, Ms. Delorier, do you wish to speak to this, just because it is certainly in your area of expertise?
I don't have any further questions. I think the presentations that we got the first time and this one are pretty similar. I do have other questions, but I think I might save those ones for the next meeting. It's just more related onto, the timeline for the development and how will that impact our businesses that are on that street. So that's one of my questions that I had. And the other one, if you have like a type of business that will be prioritized that you will want to have in that development.
I can't speak too much to that. I know that Mitch has been considering and probably even already soliciting like what businesses could possibly like occupy the space there. I think he is trying to solicit or incorporate businesses that are like complementary, but also like diverse to the existing businesses that are like already down Inglis. So there would be more attraction for the tenants that are going to occupy like the 3 floors above. If you already have 1 or 2 coffee shops or bike shops or whatever on the street, I think he's looking to add diversity, so to attract future tenants, so that there's more services and new services available in the new development.
Perfect. Yeah, that was one of my other questions that I had. That if the units will be accessible and affordable to a diverse range of.
Yep, they will be, like, they meet the criteria. I do have the unit mixes. I could pull up the unit mixes if you needed me to like cite them today.
Have we submitted the unit mixes?
I think they're in the report.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So
They're
there's
relatively small units.
yeah, exactly. I could cite the unit mixes now if you needed me to.
No, I was just wondering if you do have a plan for that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
It might even be on page 2 of this guy.
I think-
Yeah.
I think it's
I mean,
there, yeah.
it's probably not cropped in this presentation,
Yeah,
but
it's there. I mean,
Yeah.
The mixes, but like, those bachelors are
Yeah.
400 square foot or
yeah,
something.
there's 3 bachelors, like 1 per floor. There's 15 one-bedrooms, 9 two-bedrooms, and then 3 two-bedroom, 2-bath.
Perfect. Yeah.
We haven't hit the 3-bedroom
Yeah,
criteria yet, but I did make a note of the 3-bedroom wish list.
You heard that, right? Uh-oh. Oh, we were
We're just
just
saying we're gonna take the note back about 3
about 3 bedrooms. There's no 3 bedrooms right now, but we heard that a few times from you. so.
Yeah, but I didn't think it was necessary in
Oh,
this development, but, yeah.
Well, no,
Still great.
yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
But yeah, so that,
Sorry.
my last comment is I'm really looking forward just to seeing the rendering of the materials and the architecture that you will be presenting for this.
I think there would be a great opportunity on the next meeting to discuss the material on the facade, especially with the architects here. We're really just kind of warming their seats tonight, so.
Okay. Thank you,
And
Chair.
thank you, Ms. Lurie. And the last thing I'll add is if you could please communicate to Mr. Cook, or maybe it's in your purview, if a public washroom could be discussed or possibly looked into, I think it would be really beneficial to the downtown.
Okay.
It's
Like a
it's
24-hour kind of thing?
I think that would be up for discussion.
Okay.
Obviously, everyone knows there's issues around that, but there are really strong benefits to a downtown if there is a public washroom in the downtown. So yes, it's a big ask, but I think it would also be very much appreciated. So if it could just be discussed, that would be great. Councillor Graham? Yeah.
I'm really sorry. we're way over time, and my daughter was texting me there, so sorry about that.
Totally fine.
But I don't view this as a family. Maybe you as developers and the owner, Mitch Cook, has a different vision, but I see this ideally as a young professional building. So I don't know if our committee feels differently or our planner feels differently, but I don't know that I would even want you to bring that back, three-bedroom consideration. I certainly don't want to represent the committee in that desire at this time.
Sure.
So, unless someone has an opposing thought to that.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Unless there's anything else from anyone, I think we can let you go, and thank you, and maybe we'll see you next time.
Great, thank you.
Okay. February 24th is the next meeting.
All right, thank you.
Okay, and our last item for this evening is 60 Gulf Street. This is the first step in this application by Tier 2 Properties Incorporated. This is under Ms. Connolly's profile, so I will pass the microphone over to her.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Subject site is at 60 Gulf Street. You can see here on the inset map or subject map, the subject site is there. The TAC grounds under renovation from the aerial photo you can see on the right. Truro Golf Club for context, so it's Golf and Prince Street near that intersection. Site is approximately just 0.88 of an acre and have approximately 73 meters of frontage on Gulf Street. Lands are within the regional service policy area, and multiple unit residential proposals with more than 18 dwelling units shall be considered by development agreement as per policy RS 36 of the municipal planning strategy. Lands are zoned urban corridor UC and a small portion within the 1 to 100 floodway fringe. That's in that low southern corner, to note it. Residential development with more than 12 dwelling units shall be considered by development agreement as per policy UC 49, again, of the municipal planning strategy. Subject site, you can see, has been cleared. Some of our members may remember this site has been in front of the committee a couple times in a couple different iterations, this being the most recent. So the site has been cleared probably since the last time you've seen it. This gives you a little bit of context for site. So this is taken on Gulf Street, facing the golf course. This is taken on Gulf Street, facing Prince Street. Again, this application it's a new one, so it's at step 1. Staff are recommending the expanded process be used to consider this development. The proposal is an apartment building with 5 stories and 55 units total. So you see, this gives you an idea of where the building will be placed on the site. So there will be a driveway entrance at that northern portion of the site where my mouse is moving. Will flow in through the back and then flow out through another exit at the southern portion of the site. And then the underground parking will be accessed through a third access on Gulf Street. Here we see a parking plan. I've noted the distances because the parking level is larger than the building that will be above it, so it'll be on a podium, an underground podium, so to speak, that will house 55 underground parking spaces. And then you see the difference above. So this is what the building will look like when compared to the lower level parking. So 11 units per level of dwelling units, and then again through the 5 stories for the 55 units. Here we have a conceptual rendering of the proposed development. This is expected to evolve slightly as we go through the process, and this is what the applicant has submitted to date for the committee's consideration. So again, 5 stories, 55 units, 10 one-bedroom units total, and 45 two-bedroom units are currently proposed. 37% lot coverage, that's just the building itself, but then with the parking podium underneath, that's about 81% impermeable surface. Total number of parking spaces is 70. 53 of those are below grade, with 17 in the rear portion on the surface. And so that gives us a ratio of 1.4 spaces per unit. And we do have some amenity space that has been proposed through balconies for each unit. and that's all that's currently been identified. So again, staff are recommending that 5-step expanded process. The updated development application notice will be placed on the subject lands in the coming weeks. Again, this information is available on the town's website under active development applications, and a mail-out will also be sent to all property owners within 150 meters prior to the public hearing. This will also come before the committee, if you agree with that expanded process, for a second and third time prior to going to a final public hearing, which would include that full policy staff report, balancing the town's policies as well against the proposal as submitted. That concludes my presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Connolly. I understand there is someone here representing the applicant.
We do. We have Mr. Wallace here.
Mr. Wallace, yes, please come on down. Sorry. Hi, Mr. Wallace, if you could introduce yourself and just sort of your connection to the project, that would be appreciated.
Dave Wallace, I'm with Tier 2 Properties. We purchased the property 2 years ago, and Tier 2 is also the owner of the Truro Hub Mall.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Graham.
Ms. Connolly, could you remind me what the major differences are between this application and the previously approved one? Is there a difference in height in this application? Is there a difference in the number of units, in the parking? Could you just give me a very high-level reminder?
I haven't actually done a super deep comparison of the old, but there are less units in this proposal as had been approved with the previous development agreement. The height is the same. It was a 5-story that was approved the last time, and this is again a 5-story in front of you today. The number of parking, I believe, is better with this application, as it's 1.4 is the ratio, and it was a little bit less, but it was still above 1 in the last iteration, if I remember. And Director Fox, you can correct me if I'm wrong on any of that, but there is a slight change again. The unit difference is the main change through that. And as well as the shape and the look of the building, of course, that's also changed.
Yeah, and just one more note to that is that there's also a lot more surface parking in this proposal. There was very little on the previous version, so that's a significant change as well.
I hear that the height is the same as the width, like the overall.
The footprint is
Footprint.
2,500 square feet less than before.
Okay,
Smaller.
smaller.
And I would argue the height is shorter as well because there's no hip roof on this.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think I remember lots of conversations from you, Councillor Thomas, really favoring that roof style the last time. I think.
Is it my turn? I have, yeah, we'll get to that. But first of all, what's the, hi, Mr. Wallace. How are you this evening?
Good, how you doing?
Good. I just was wondering about the clientele. What's your, you know, do you have a certain clientele that you're looking for? Because there's a golf course right there, et cetera, and I'm just wondering, there's real estate developments around golf courses. Is it that kind of, or?
The reason we purchased the property is definitely because of its location, close to the golf course. It's walking distance to downtown, and there's a lot of amenities around it for sure. Yeah.
Right. I believe there's a need in this town for low-cost housing, affordable housing, middle housing, and higher level housing. And so, I don't know where you're going with that as far as your clientele, but I do believe there is a market for, where people would like to golf, et cetera, and live in a building right by the golf course, et cetera, and they want certain amenities, et cetera. Is that your client is, or have you?
I would say yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think there's a market for that.
Yep.
Right? And I think it's important that the town provide housing for everyone,
Yep.
And so I'm kind of pleased to hear that, actually. Yeah, the building itself, you know, the rendition is nothing to write home about. It's a very typical kind of modern building, you know, and I don't think it's going to receive any awards for architectural design. But that's just personal, right? And you can't be personal at this, so, yeah, and I'm pleased to see, I think that the 5-story is probably acceptable in the neighborhood, but I'm not sure, you know, there's a give and take involved with that, and you probably know the history of all of that. And
I do, yes,
and so, you know.
and we have an existing development agreement approved.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The one thing that I am, and this is a concrete comment, is that the underground parkade and the building itself, where it's situated on the lot, I like the idea of having street trees of some sort, and I was wondering its location, you know, because the underground parkade is larger than the building, and so, you know, you really can't grow any trees over where that parkade is. I'm just wondering, can you ensure somehow that the underground parkade is moved far enough from Gulf Street to allow the planting of some trees along there?
One of the issues with the development agreement that PAC and council approved, there was 2 levels of underground parking.
Right.
And of course, with the water table, it's almost impossible to get 2 levels underground. To do it would be extremely costly. It wouldn't be worthwhile. So in order for us to have a sufficient parking ratio of 1.4 per unit, we decided to do a parking podium, hence what you see. We can plant vegetation and low trees for sure,
Right.
but I
Soil
don't
depth is
think,
not
to
sufficient.
move the podium, no, we can't do that.
Right, and the soil depth is not sufficient enough for larger trees.
Correct.
And that was a problem with the last proposal, and so it's going to be that way with this one.
Yeah, we're dealing with a lot that's 36,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Great location, but it's a small lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for your answers.
Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Mr. Wallace. You mentioned that you have an existing development agreement. I'm not lucky enough to have been on council to have dealt with that one. I understand from my history that it was quite the discussion. But you mentioned that the approved development agreement had 2 levels of underground parking. You mentioned the water table and the difficulty. Are you able to ballpark figure the cost of the underground parking, either the one that you're putting in versus the surface parking that you're putting in, like cost per spot, ballpark?
I can say that ballpark underground parking, one space would be around $50,000 right now. That's not including the one, if you went 2 stories down, it would probably be close to double that.
Wow, okay. And then for surface parking per spot, roughly?
I don't know.
Okay. I'm just curious, because we do talk a lot about affordability in the town, and I agree that, you know, probably your clientele are likely to be either golfers or football players or track runners, I guess, based on the location. You're well suited there for the golf course, and I could see possibly my parents even moving in there at some point because my dad's an avid golfer. But, you know, well suited there. But just about the affordability, and just because you mentioned the high cost of the underground parking, I just wanted to get an idea, just sort of what we were looking at there. So I thank you for
there's a
that.
few issues that came across, I guess, our review is the number of units on the existing development agreement. I think there were 67 units. The majority of the units are quite small. So that was an issue we had. Hence, we're going to 55 units now. So we reduced the number by 20%. What was the other issue now?
Well, you've also reduced the footprint too, though.
Well, the footprint's down too. Yeah, it's smaller as well. But
So did the apartments get bigger?
some apartments got bigger, yes. The units are bigger overall on average. The issue is, and for those who don't know about Tier 2 properties, our sister company is RCS Construction. So we're one of the medium-sized construction companies, GCs in Nova Scotia. So I'm very fortunate to have a really good idea of construction costs for many of our developments that we're doing throughout the Maritimes. The cost to build the approved building from 2 years ago is just, it's outrageous. So we had to look at cutting down the cost of construction. Because really, at the end of the day, real estate development, it's about the cost of construction versus the cost of rent. It's really what it is. So hence, these are the changes that we're putting forward to you and hopefully council.
Right, and then when you mentioned rental prices, so I assume this is all rental units, is there
They'll all be rental units. It's, you know, will we be in the $2 per square foot rent range? Possibly.
okay,
It's hard, when you go into secondary markets, we're doing the same thing in Sydney, Nova Scotia, New Glasgow. We're building the same in Amherst. We have a major development in Riverview happening as well. Every place is different, every market is different. The cost of construction is pretty much the same, but it's hard to tell. Like Truro, I know you have a lot of units in the hopper. There's a lot of units being built right now as well. So it's difficult to say what people are willing to pay for rents and how many people that pay high rents, you know, how much of that population do you absorb and how long does it take, right? So it's not easy work.
no, I'm glad I'm not the one doing that, it doesn't sound like easy work. I do have a question, and this can be for anybody who wishes to answer it, just some concerns about that one little house back there on Clegg Street, number 14, which appears to be the only one back there. It's got the family restaurant there, it's got the car dealership, it's got the golf course buildings and the church, and now this apartment building and parking lot coming in there. I don't even know really what my question is, but I look at that poor little house sitting there all alone, and I worry for the owner. I worry for whoever's living there and what is happening around them. I know we have to consider the needs of the many over the needs of the few. And unfortunately, this little house on Clegg Street, I guess, would be the few. But I guess where I'm going is, what measures can you be taking? Especially, you mentioned your sister company, RCS Construction. Measures you can undertake to try to make sure that the development is, I don't know, quieter, fewer vibrations, less of an impact on this property owner.
Again, there's an existing development agreement approved. So I feel that what we're proposing being, again, 20% smaller, I guess, in terms of the size of the building and number of units, possibly we're helping a little bit by doing that in itself.
Possibly.
Vegetation buffering, fencing, all of those types of materials could be utilized.
Okay, and then I'm just thinking on the construction techniques. I mean, this is your area of expertise,
Not
certainly
mine,
mine,
more
but
development, but yeah.
well, you know the people, I guess. If that's something that could be brought back to whoever may be building or a consideration going forward, what sort of measures can be undertaken to try to reduce noise, vibration, et cetera, just to avoid impact around there? Thank you.
Councillor Graham?
My only comment is to echo Councillor Thomas's comments regarding the visual of the building, hoping that this is really just a starting point. It really isn't anything to get all excited about.
Can you bring the rendering up again?
It's page 3, if that helps. But I think you're hearing it from some of us here.
Yeah, I'm just curious what you don't like about the rendering.
To me, it's quite institutional looking. It could be a hospital, it could be anything. And I think you will hear that from the community as well. we heard it the last time, and I expect that we'll hear it again. So I would encourage some further enhancements.
Yeah, I can echo those comments as well. I think it, especially with the large black swaths with no windows, I don't think that it adds anything, in the window shapes are, I mean, you're in a neighborhood which has some pretty historic homes, so obviously nobody's looking for a historical building, but I don't think this is going to age well, if I could put it that way. Any other comments from the committee for Mr. Wallace? Okay, well, you have some things to discuss, and we'll see you at the next meeting.
I'm going to go
Thank
to
you.
bed first, I think.
Sorry?
I'm going to go to bed first.
Sure, we all are. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. TJ, did you think this would be this long? I think every meeting, I think, will be the longest, and then the next one seems to be the longest, so. I don't, if there's any other business to come before the committee, someone can raise it. And hearing none, I will note that our next meeting is February 24th, and we are back to our regular time of 6 p.m. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Motion carried. Thank you.